am Sarah, 32 years old, and as a forensic accountant for high net worth litigation, I spend my life uncovering what people try desperately to hide. I trace hidden assets, expose fraud, and understand the brutal language of money better than I understand love. But nothing in my career prepared me for the audit I was about to perform on my own life. The morning after my husband David was buried, I returned to the home we had built together, only to hear the screeching sound of a power drill grinding into metal. I stood frozen in the driveway as a locksmith dismantled our front door, with my father-in-law Richard standing over him like a warden. He turned, saw me, and didn't even blink. Blood family, only Sarah. "Your time here is over," he announced coldly, his voice devoid of any grief. I stood still as my brother-in-law Kevin kicked my suitcases down the front steps, watching them tumble and burst open on the wet pavement. I looked Richard straight in the eye, my hand tightening around my phone, and said absolutely nothing. I simply turned around and walked away because I knew something they didn't. I knew exactly who owned the ground they were standing on, and I knew that by the time I was done with them, they would wish they had been buried alongside David. Before I tell you how I evicted them with a single phone call and exposed their crimes to the federal government, hit that subscribe button if you believe that dignity is a weapon that never runs out of ammunition. The rain was falling in sheets. A cold gray drizzle, typical of Virginia in November, matching the numbness that had settled in my chest since the military police knocked on my door 3 days ago. I had taken a walk to the park at the end of the block, needing to escape the suffocating smell of lilies and sympathy casseroles that filled my house. I just wanted 30 minutes of silence. But as I walked back up the driveway, the sound of the drill pierced the air. It was a violent mechanical intrusion. There were 3 men on my porch. The locksmith, who looked uncomfortable and kept his eyes on his work. Richard, my father-in-law, wearing one of David's old bomber jackets that was too tight across his stomach. And Kevin, David's younger brother, who was leaning against the brickwork smoking a cigarette, looking at me with a smirk that made my stomach turn. "What is going on?" I asked, my voice trembling not from fear, but from a sudden sharp spike of adrenaline. Richard stepped forward, blocking the path to the door. The locksmith paused the drill, whining as it powered down. "We are securing the property," Richard said. He spoke as if he were reading a prepared statement. "Under the circumstances, it is best if you find alternative accommodations." My keys were in my hand. I squeezed them until the metal bit into my palm. "This is my house, Richard. David and I bought this. My name is on the deed." Richard laughed, a dry, barking sound. He shook his head, looking at Kevin as if sharing a private joke. "You were just the wife, Sarah. You didn't put a dime into this place. David was the soldier. David paid the mortgage with his blood money. Now that he is gone, this property reverts to his blood family. That is the law. You are just a guest who has overstayed her welcome." I looked at him, analyzing his face the way I analyzed balance sheets. He was lying, or he was deluded, or both. I knew the law. I knew about rights of survivorship. I knew that in Virginia, a house owned by a married couple automatically went to the surviving spouse. There was no reversion to blood family. That was a myth greedy relatives told themselves to justify theft. "I am going inside to get my laptop and my files," I said, taking a step forward. Kevin pushed himself off the wall. He was 30, unemployed, and had spent his entire adult life resenting David for being the successful one. Now, with David gone, he was puffing up his chest, trying to fill a space he was too small for. He stepped in front of me. "You are not going anywhere, Sarah. Get out of my way, Kevin." He shoved me. It wasn't a hard shove, but it was enough to make me stumble backward on the slick driveway. I caught my balance, my heart hammering against my ribs. The physical contact crossed a line. It shifted the situation from a dispute to an assault. The locksmith looked up, clearly alarmed. "Hey, look, I just changed locks. I don't want any trouble with the police." "Just finish the job," Richard snapped at him. Then he turned back to me, his face twisting with a sneer. "Look at you. No tears. Your husband is barely cold in the ground and you are worried about your laptop. I always told David you were a cold-hearted gold digger. You never loved him. You loved the security. You loved the status. Well, the ride is over, sweetheart." The accusation stung worse than the shove. I hadn't cried in front of them because David had made me promise. 2 years ago, before his last deployment, he held my face and said, Sarah, if anything happens, do not let them see you break. They will feed on it. You are the strong one. You are the general now. I swallowed the lump in my throat. I need my clothes, Richard. I need my medication. Kevin laughed and pointed to the lawn. Way ahead of you. I looked over to the side of the porch. My 2 large suitcases, the ones I traveled with for work, were lying in the mud. They had been thrown from the second-floor balcony. One had burst open. My silk blouses, my underwear, my blazers were strewn across the wet grass, soaking up the mud and the rain. I felt a heat rise up my neck, a white-hot fury that threatened to make me scream. But I didn't scream. I looked at the mud staining the sleeve of my favorite cream cashmere sweater. I looked at Richard, who was watching me with a look of triumph. He wanted a reaction. He wanted me to wail, to beg to cause a scene so he could call the police and paint me as the hysterical, unstable widow. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of rain and wet earth. I pulled my phone out and took a photo of the locksmith drilling the lock. I took a photo of Richard blocking the door. I took a photo of Kevin smirking. And finally, I walked over to the grass and took a high-resolution photo of my ruined belongings. What are you doing? Kevin asked, his smirk faltering slightly. Documenting, I said softly. I zipped up the broken suitcase as best I could, ignoring the mud coating my hands. I dragged the bags to the curb. You are making a mistake, Richard, I said, my voice steady. A very expensive mistake. Richard waved his hand dismissively. Go find a motel, Sarah. Or go back to whatever hole you crawled out of before you tricked my son into marrying you. I didn't reply. I called an Uber. As I waited in the rain watching the locksmith hand the new keys to Richard, I didn't feel defeated. I felt the cold, hard clarity of a plan forming. I wasn't just a wife. I was a forensic accountant. I knew how to follow paper trails, and I knew that people like Richard, people who were desperate and greedy, always left a trail. I climbed into the back of the Uber, shivering as the wet clothes clung to my skin. The driver, a kind older man, looked at me in the rearview mirror. Are you okay, ma'am? He asked. I will be, I said, watching my house disappear in the rain. My mind drifted back to yesterday, to the funeral. The moment I realized the war hadn't ended with David's death, a new one had just begun. The memory of the funeral played in my head like a corrupted video file, glitchy and painful. The church had been packed. David was a hero, a decorated veteran, and half the town had come to pay their respects. But I had felt like a ghost at my own husband's service. It started when I walked into the sanctuary. I had arrived early to have a private moment with the casket, but they were already there. Richard, Kevin, and Kevin's wife, Vanessa. Vanessa was wearing a dress that was inappropriate for a nightclub, let alone a funeral. It was a tight crimson-red bandage dress that ended mid-thigh. She had told everyone it was wine-colored, but under the church lights, it was screaming red. As I approached the front pew, the spot reserved for the widow Vanessa slid into it. She spread her skirt out, taking up 2 spaces. She looked up at me, checking her reflection in her compact mirror. "Oh, Sarah," she said, popping her gum. "We saved this row for close family. Mom and Dad thought it would be better if you sat in the second row. You know, so the blood relatives can be together in his final moments." I looked at Richard. He was busy shaking hands with a local politician, playing the grieving father perfectly. "I am his wife, Vanessa," I whispered, trying to keep my voice from cracking. Vanessa shrugged, applying another layer of lip gloss. "Technically. But we all know David only married you because he needed someone to handle his bills while he was deployed. You were basically an administrative assistant with a ring. Sit in the back, Sarah. Don't make a scene. It is disrespectful to David. I should have slapped her. I should have dragged her out of that pew by her hair. But the church was filling up. People were watching. David's commanding officer was walking in. I couldn't dishonor David's memory with a brawl. So I sat in the second row behind Vanessa's massive hat, watching her text on her phone throughout the service. Then came the eulogy. Richard stood at the pulpit, clutching a handkerchief he never actually used. He spoke for 20 minutes. He talked about David's childhood, He talked about David's football games in high school. He talked about David's bravery in Afghanistan. He never mentioned me, not once. He talked about David as if his life had stopped at age 18 before we met. He erased 10 years of our life together, 10 years of late-night calls of me holding him through PTSD nightmares of us building our future. To the congregation, Richard presented a version of David that belonged solely to his father. I sat there staring at the back of Richard's head, realizing that this wasn't just grief. This was ownership. They didn't mourn David, they coveted him. They coveted his legacy, his status, and as I would soon find out, his assets. After the service, I went to the gravesite. I tried to place a single white rose on the casket, a tradition David and I had discussed. As I stepped forward, Vanessa cut in front of me. She handed her phone to Kevin. "Take a picture of me crying," she whispered loud enough for me to hear. "Make sure you get the flag in the background. It is great for engagement." She posed, burying her face in a lace handkerchief, one hand dramatically resting on the polished wood of the coffin. Kevin snapped a dozen photos. "Got it," he said. Vanessa checked the photos immediately. "Ugh, delete that one, my arm looks fat. Take it again." I stood there clutching my white rose, feeling a wave of nausea. They were using my husband's corpse as a prop for social media clout. I turned away, unable to watch. That was when Richard's sister, Aunt Linda, a woman I had met maybe twice, leaned into me. Her breath smelled of stale coffee and malice. "You know," she hissed, grabbing my elbow. "He never really loved you. He told Richard he was planning to leave you before this last trip. You should be ashamed showing up here acting like the grieving widow. You are finally free to go find some other rich man to leech off of." I pulled my arm away, trembling. That was the narrative they had constructed, that I was the villain, that I was the parasite. They had to believe that because if they admitted I was a loving wife who contributed equally, then they couldn't justify what they were planning to do to me. The Uber driver's voice snapped me back to the present. "We are here, ma'am, the Ritz-Carlton." I looked up. The golden lights of the hotel awning were a stark contrast to the dark, rainy street I had just left. I didn't tell the driver why I chose this place. Richard and the rest of them thought I was destitute without David. They thought I was a housewife who lived off an allowance. They didn't know I was a senior forensic accountant for a private firm in D.C. They didn't know that while David fought wars overseas, I fought financial wars for Fortune 500 companies. I made 6 figures. I had my own investment portfolio. I paid the driver and tipped him $50. I walked into the lobby, my muddy boots squishing on the marble floor. The concierge, a man named Henri, who had helped David and me plan our anniversary dinner last year, looked up. His smile faltered for a second when he saw my appearance, but he recovered instantly. Professional, discreet. "Mrs. Reynolds," Henri said, coming out from behind the desk. "We were so devastated to hear about your loss. How can we serve you?" "I need a suite, Henri. Ideally one with a strong view of the city, and I need a secure high-speed internet connection. I will be staying for an indefinite period." "Of course. The executive suite is available. I will have them send up some tea and dry towels immediately." He didn't ask about the mud. He didn't ask about the luggage. He simply handed me a key card. 10 minutes later, I was in a room that cost more per night than Kevin made in a month. I stripped off my wet clothes and threw them in the corner. I didn't shower. Not yet. I had work to do. I sat at the mahogany desk and opened my laptop. It was a ruggedized machine encrypted designed for handling sensitive financial data. But tonight, I wasn't logging into a client's server. I was logging into my own life. I typed in the master password for our home automation system. David was a tech geek. He had wired our house with the latest smart home technology. Nest cameras, smart locks, networked thermostat, even a smart refrigerator. Everything was connected to a central hub, a hub that I had administrator access to. The screen flickered to life. A grid of 6 camera feeds appeared. Living room, kitchen, hallway, master bedroom, garage, backyard. I watched in silence the glow of the screen illuminating my face in the dark hotel room. They were in the living room. Richard was pacing back and forth holding a beer. Kevin was sitting on my beige sofa, the one I didn't allow shoes on, with his muddy boots up on the coffee table. "We did it, Dad." Kevin said, his voice tinny through the microphone. "She is gone. I told you she wouldn't fight back. She is weak. She is in shock." Richard grunted, taking a swig of beer. "But she will be back. She will get a lawyer. We need to find the papers." "What papers?" Kevin asked. "The insurance policy, you idiot. The military pays out $400,000 for a combat death, plus the private life insurance. That money belongs to me. I raised him. I fed him. That check should have my name on it." I watched as Richard walked over to the fireplace mantel. Our wedding photo was there, framed in silver. It was my favorite picture of us. David was laughing, cake smeared on his nose, and I was looking at him with pure adoration. Richard picked it up. He looked at it for a second, his face twisting in disgust. "Trash," he muttered. He threw the frame into the fireplace. The glass shattered. The silver frame bent against the brick. I gasped, my hand flying to my mouth. It felt like a physical blow. He wasn't just claiming the house. He was actively destroying the memory of us. He wanted to scrub me out of existence. I zoomed in on the camera feed. I could see the shards of glass glinting in the firelight. I didn't cry. The tears that had been threatening to fall earlier evaporated. In their place, a cold, hard resolve solidified. It was the same feeling I got when I found a discrepancy in a ledger the moment I knew I had caught a criminal. "You want a war, Richard?" I whispered to the screen. "I will give you a war. But it won't be fought with shouting matches on the lawn. It will be fought with paper and laws and numbers." I minimized the camera feed and opened a new browser tab. I searched for the number of the family lawyer Richard had mentioned in the past. Mr. Henderson, a strip mall lawyer who handled DUIs and petty disputes. I picked up the hotel phone and dialed. I needed to confirm their strategy. I needed them to commit to the lie on record. "Hello, law offices of Barry Henderson. Mr. Henderson, this is Sarah Reynolds, David Reynolds' wife." There was a pause. The line crackled. "Ah, yes. Mrs. Reynolds, I was expecting your call. Richard told me you might reach out. I want to understand the legal basis for my eviction." "Mr. Henderson," I said, keeping my voice meek and confused. Richard said, "The house goes back to the Blood family." "Yes, well," Henderson cleared his throat. "It is a complex statute, Mrs. Reynolds, the Virginia Bloodline Preservation Act. In cases of military death where the assets were purchased with combat pay, there is a precedent for the estate to revert to the parents if the marriage produced no male heirs. It is an obscure law, but Richard is within his rights." I hit the record button on my laptop, capturing every word. The Virginia Bloodline Preservation Act. I typed it into my legal database. 0 results. It didn't exist. He was making it up. He was conspiring with Richard to defraud a widow. "I see," I said, feigning defeat. "So I have no claim to the house, even though my name is on the deed. The deed is flexible in these situations." Henderson said, his voice patronizing. "Listen, Sarah, can I call you Sarah? Richard is willing to be generous. If you sign a quitclaim deed and waive your rights to the insurance money, he is willing to give you $5,000 for moving expenses to help you get back on your feet. $5,000 for a house worth $1.5 million, for a life insurance policy worth $2 million. That sounds very generous," I said, my voice dripping with hidden sarcasm. "It is," Henderson said. "Look, don't get lawyers involved, Sarah. It will only drain what little money you have. Just sign the papers. I will have Kevin drop them off at... Where are you staying?" "I am staying with a friend. I lied. I will let you know when I am ready to sign." I hung up the phone. My hand was shaking not from fear, but from rage. They weren't just kicking me out. They were trying to steal everything David had left me. They were counting on me being stupid. They were counting on me being a grieving, helpless woman who would believe a man in a cheap suit just because he used big words. I looked back at the camera feed. Vanessa had just walked into the living room. She was holding one of my designer handbags, a limited edition Chanel that I had bought as a bonus to myself last year. "OMG, babe, look at this," she squealed to Kevin. "It is real leather. I bet I could get $2,000 for this on eBay." She started rummaging through the bag, dumping my personal items onto the floor. My lipstick, my receipts, a folded ultrasound picture I had been meaning to show David when he got back. Wait. The ultrasound picture. I watched in horror as Vanessa picked up the small black and white image. I was 3 months pregnant. I hadn't told anyone yet. I wanted to tell David first. Vanessa squinted at it. What is this? Some medical garbage? She crumpled it up and tossed it into the fireplace, right on top of the shattered wedding photo. The scream that finally tore out of my throat was primal. It wasn't human. It was the sound of a mother watching her child being attacked. They didn't just take my house. They didn't just take my money. They just threw the first picture of David's unborn son into the fire like it was trash. I stood up, knocking the chair over. I walked to the window and looked out at the city skyline blurred by the rain. Okay, I said aloud to the empty room. No more mercy. I sat back down and cracked my knuckles. I opened 3 new windows on my laptop. Window 1, the Internal Revenue Service Whistleblower Division. Window 2, the Department of Defense Fraud and Abuse Hotline. Window 3, the local power company customer portal. I looked at the camera feed one last time. Kevin was laughing at something on the TV. Richard was toasting him with a beer. Enjoy the heat while it lasts, boys, I whispered. I clicked on the power company portal. I navigated to the service status page. I hovered my mouse over the button that said emergency shut off. But that was too simple, too quick. I wanted to play with them first. I wanted them to feel the house turning against them. I went to the thermostat control. The current temperature in the house was a cozy 72 degrees. I set it to 50 degrees. Then I went to the lighting control. I set a timer. At 3 a.m., every light in the house would strobe at maximum brightness. Then I went to the smart speakers. I uploaded a file from my music library, a heavy metal track that David used to listen to when he worked out. I set the volume to 100%, scheduled for 3:05 a.m. I leaned back in my chair, watching the temperature reading on the screen start to drop by a single degree, yetish bur, yetmish. In the living room, Vanessa rubbed her arms. Is it getting cold in here? She asked. Richard frowned. Probably just a draft. Old house. I smiled. It wasn't a smile of happiness. It was the baring of teeth. You have no idea, Richard, I thought. This house isn't old. It is smart. And right now, it hates you just as much as I do. I closed the laptop, but I didn't sleep. I lay in the dark, listening to the rain, waiting for the sun to rise so I could begin the real work. The work of dismantling their lives, dollar by dollar, lie by lie. They wanted a blood feud. They were about to learn that ink is thicker than blood, and a forensic accountant never misses a penny. The glow of my laptop screen was the only light in the hotel suite. Outside, the storm was still battering D.C., but the turbulence inside my chest was far more violent. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded on the mahogany desk, watching the live feed from the master bedroom. My sanctuary. The room David and I had designed together, choosing every thread count and paint swatch with the care of 2 people building a fortress against the world. Now it was a stage for a grotesque performance. On the screen, the door to the master suite swung open. Vanessa walked in. She was holding a glass of David's vintage Cabernet, sloshing it dangerously close to the cream carpet. She wasn't just walking. She was prowling. She spun around in the center of the room, her arms wide, claiming the space. I watched as she kicked off her muddy boots, leaving streaks of wet earth on the rug I had imported from Morocco. "This is it," she said to no one, her voice tinny through the camera's microphone. "This is the life I deserve." She walked straight to the double doors of my walk-in closet. My heart rate spiked on the monitor of my smartwatch. That closet wasn't just storage. It was an archive of my career. Every handbag, every pair of heels, every tailored blazer represented a case I had won a fraudster. I had exposed a bonus I had earned with 80-hour work weeks. David hadn't bought those things. I had. Vanessa threw the doors open. I saw her jaw literally drop. The custom lighting system illuminated the rows of color-coded designer wear like a boutique on Fifth Avenue. "Holy hell," she whispered. She stepped inside. I leaned closer to the screen, feeling a phantom violation, as if her hands were touching my skin. She ran her fingers along a row of silk blouses, pulling them roughly off the hangers and tossing them onto the floor if they didn't catch her eye. Ugly. Old. Boring, she muttered, discarding a vintage Chanel jacket that was worth more than her husband's car. Then she stopped. Her eyes had landed on the shoe display, specifically the center shelf. My Christian Louboutin So Kates, black patent leather, the signature red soles gleaming under the LED lights. They were size 6, sleek, sharp, and dangerous. I had bought them to wear to the deposition of a corrupt CEO 3 years ago. They were my power armor. Vanessa gasped. She set her wine glass down on a stack of cashmere sweaters. I flinched as a red ring stained the fabric and grabbed the shoes. She sat down on the velvet ottoman in the center of the closet. I knew Vanessa's shoe size. I had seen her leave her knockoff sneakers by the door many times. She was a size 9, arguably a wide 9. I watched mesmerized by the sheer delusion unfolding before me. She unbuckled the ankle straps. She positioned her foot. "There is no way," I whispered to the empty hotel room. But she was determined. She jammed her toes into the narrow toe box. I could see her face contorting with effort. She pushed, she shoved, she grunted, forcing flesh and bone into a structure designed for petite precision. Fits perfectly, she lied to herself standing up. She wobbled. Her heel hung off the back of the shoe by at least 2 inches, hovering over the carpet like a precipice. She took a step, her knees bent awkwardly to compensate for the pain and the impossible fit. "Look at me," she said, admiring herself in the full-length mirror. "Queen of the castle." She took another step, a strut. She put her full weight on the stiletto heel, trying to pivot like a runway model. Snap. The sound was sharp and distinctive, like a dry branch breaking in a winter forest. The heel of the right shoe gave way under the torque and the improper weight distribution. Vanessa shrieked, her ankle twisting violently as she collapsed onto the floor. I didn't wince. I didn't feel sympathy. I reached for my notepad and wrote down item 42. Christian Louboutin. So Kate, 120 millimeters. Value $795. Status destroyed. Vanessa sat on the floor, rubbing her ankle. She glared at the broken shoe as if it had personally insulted her. "Cheap trash," she spat, kicking the ruined masterpiece into the corner. She didn't stop there. She pulled herself up, limping slightly, and grabbed her phone. She adjusted her hair, pulled down the front of her dress to show more cleavage, and tapped the Instagram icon. I opened Instagram on my laptop, navigating to her profile. A red ring appeared around her profile picture. Live. I clicked it. The feed on my laptop showed what she was broadcasting to the world, while the security camera feed showed the sad reality of her standing in my closet, surrounded by the mess she had made. "Hey guys, welcome back to the channel," Vanessa chirped, her voice jumping an octave into a fake, bubbly influencer tone. The pain in her ankle was completely masked by a terrifyingly bright smile. She panned the phone around the room, making sure to capture the rows of designer bags and the expansive space. "So huge update. As you know, my husband's family just recovered their estate. We finally got the keys to the main house today. It has been such a long, emotional battle, but justice was served." I watched the viewer count tick up. 12 people, 20 people, mostly her friends from high school and a few curious neighbors. "I just wanted to give you a tour of the master closet," she continued, walking over to my handbag collection. "It is a total disaster right now. The previous resident, well, let's just say she was a squatter." My blood ran cold. "Squatter." She pointed the camera at the pile of clothes she had thrown on the floor, the clothes she had discarded. "Look at this mess she left." Vanessa sighed, shaking her head. She had no respect for this beautiful home. "Honestly, it is sad. She was living here on my father-in-law's charity, spending his money on all this stuff. And she didn't even take care of it." She reached out and grabbed my Hermes Birkin, my holy grail bag, the one I had waited 2 years on a list for. "Like this," Vanessa said, holding it up to the camera. "It is a knockoff, obviously. Real money doesn't need to show off like this. But I think I can clean it up. Maybe do a giveaway for you guys. Who wants a free bag? Drop a heart in the comments." Comments started rolling in. "OMG, yes. You deserve this, Ness. That squatter sounds awful. Glad she's gone." I sat in the dark, the blue light of the screen reflecting in my eyes. She wasn't just stealing my property. She was rewriting my history. She was painting me as the villain in the house I paid for. She was calling my authentic life a counterfeit, while she stood there, in a dress she couldn't afford, holding a bag she couldn't pronounce in a house she didn't own. I moved my mouse to the top of the screen. Command-Shift-5. Record entire screen. I needed this. I needed every second of this broadcast. This wasn't just vanity. It was defamation. It was public admission of theft. She was broadcasting her crime scene investigation directly to the victim. Vanessa continued her tour, limping slightly, but hiding it well. "We are going to do a full renovation soon," she announced. "This whole vibe is just so cold, so sterile. We are going to bring some life back into this place. Get rid of all this pretentiousness." She paused, looking at a framed photo on the shelf. It was a picture of me receiving my CPA certification. She turned the frame face down. "Anyway, I just wanted to hop on and say thank you for all the support. We are finally home. The negative energy is gone. It is just family now. Real family." She blew a kiss to the camera. "Bye, lovies." The Instagram feed went black. On the security camera, the smile dropped from Vanessa's face instantly. She looked down at the Birkin bag in her hand. She opened it, rummaging through the pockets. Finding nothing but a few business cards, she tossed it onto the shelf, missing the edge. The bag fell to the floor with a heavy thud. "Whatever," she muttered. She turned off the closet lights, not the switch, but by yanking the smart bulb cord until it snapped, and limped out of the room, leaving the door wide open. I stopped the screen recording. I saved the file as evidence_Vanessa_theft_defamation_01.mp4. I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking softly. My hand went to the phone. I wasn't calling the police. Not yet. The police would just file a report. I needed something more permanent. I opened a new email draft. Recipient: the fraud department at the luxury consignment platform where I knew Vanessa had an account. Subject: stolen goods alert. Serial numbers enclosed. I began to type, my fingers flying across the keys. I listed every bag she had touched. I listed the serial numbers I had cataloged for insurance purposes. I attached the video of her claiming she would sell them or give them away. "To whom it may concern," I wrote, "the following items are currently in the possession of an unauthorized party who has publicly stated intent to distribute them. Any attempt to list these items should be flagged immediately as trafficking in stolen property." I hit send. Then I opened another tab. I searched for the brand of wine she had spilled on my cashmere. A 2015 Silver Oak Cabernet. I added it to the spreadsheet. Item 43, cashmere sweater, cream, stain damage, value $350. Item 44, Silver Oak Cabernet, bottle opened unauthorized, value $145. Item 45, Master Closet Smart Lighting System, physical damage, value $200. The total at the bottom of the spreadsheet was climbing. It was already over $5,000 in damages and theft just from her 20-minute fashion show. In the state of Virginia, grand larceny is defined as theft of property worth $500 or more. Vanessa hadn't just committed a crime, she had committed a felony, and she had live-streamed her confession to the world. I closed the laptop lid, but the image of her jamming her foot into my shoe burned in my mind. It was the perfect metaphor for their entire invasion. They were trying to force themselves into a life that didn't fit them. They were trying to wear my success, my discipline, and my sacrifices like a costume. But they didn't realize that the costume came with a price tag, and the bill was coming due. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the rain-soaked streets of D.C. Somewhere out there in the dark, the gears of the system were beginning to turn. They thought they had won a house. What they had actually done was locked themselves inside a trap, and tomorrow I was going to spring it. The rain had finally stopped pounding against the windows of my hotel suite, but on the screen of my laptop, a different kind of storm was brewing inside my home. It was 11 o'clock at night. Most grieving families would be asleep or sitting quietly sharing memories of the departed. But Richard and Kevin were not grieving. They were celebrating. I watched through the wide-angle lens of the living room camera as 5 men piled into my sanctuary. They were Richard's cronies, men with loud voices and heavy boots who smelled of stale cigar smoke even through a digital feed. They didn't wipe their feet. They tracked mud and gravel directly onto the Persian rug I had bought at an auction in Istanbul. They treated my home not like a residence, but like a conquered territory. "Set it up here, boys," Richard announced, slamming a heavy case of poker chips onto the dining room table. I flinched. That table was solid mahogany, a custom piece that required specific oil treatments and coasters. Richard slid the metal case across the surface, leaving a long, invisible scratch that I could feel in my own skin. Kevin walked in from the kitchen, carrying stacks of red plastic cups and bags of cheap pretzels. He dumped the food directly onto the table, not bothering with bowls. "So this is the place?" one of the men asked, looking around with greedy eyes. He was a heavy-set man named Tony, someone Richard owed money to from his days betting on greyhound races. "Nice spread, Richie. Really nice." "It is all right," Richard said, waving his hand dismissively as he sat at the head of the table, my seat. "A bit too modern for my taste." Sarah had cold taste, no warmth, but the bones are good. It will fetch a pretty penny. I leaned in closer to the screen. This was it. They were getting comfortable. They were lowering their guard. "You sure she is not coming back?" Tony asked, shuffling the deck of cards with a loud snapping rhythm. Richard laughed, cracking open a beer. "She is gone. Scared her off yesterday. She is probably crying in some motel room right now, wondering how she is going to pay for her next meal. The house is ours, Tony. The law is on our side." They started dealing the cards. I adjusted the volume on my laptop, ensuring the audio recording software was capturing every syllable. I wasn't just watching a poker game, I was witnessing a conspiracy. The game went on for an hour. The pile of chips in the center grew, but the beer ran out. "Kevin, go check the cellar," Richard commanded, tossing his empty can onto the floor. David always bragged about his wine collection. Let's see if the boy had any good taste. My stomach dropped. The cellar. It wasn't David's collection. David drank beer and the occasional whiskey. The climate-controlled wine cellar in the basement was my investment portfolio. It contained bottles that weren't meant to be drunk on a Tuesday night poker game. They were meant to age for another 10 years. They were assets appreciating in value faster than the stock market. I switched the camera view to the basement feed. I watched Kevin stumble down the stairs, flipping on the lights. He walked past the racks, trailing his hand along the bottles. He didn't look at the labels. He didn't check the vintages. He was looking for anything that looked fancy. He stopped at the locked glass cabinet in the back, the one that held the crown jewels of my collection. "Locked," he shouted up the stairs. "Break it," Richard yelled back. "It is our house, son. We don't need keys." Kevin grabbed a heavy brass candlestick from a nearby shelf and swung it. The glass shattered. I gasped, my hand flying to my mouth. He reached in and pulled out 3 bottles. My heart stopped. He was holding 3 bottles of 1992 Screaming Eagle Cabernet. Those weren't just bottles of wine. They were $5,000 each. They were rare cult California wines that I had spent months tracking down. They were intended to fund our future child's college tuition. Kevin carried them upstairs like they were 6 packs of soda. "Look at this dust," Kevin complained, placing the bottles on the poker table. "Probably vinegar by now." Richard squinted at the label. "Screaming Eagle. Sounds like something a patriot would drink. Open it up." I watched in horror as Kevin took a corkscrew and jammed it into the foil. He didn't cut it properly. He just shredded the top. He drove the worm into the cork and yanked. The cork crumbled. He pushed the rest of it down into the bottle. "Who wants some fancy vinegar?" Kevin laughed, pouring the dark ruby liquid into the red plastic solo cups. He filled the cups to the brim. $5,000 of wine poured like fruit punch. Tony took a swig. He grimaced. "It is dry. Kind of bitter." "Yeah, well, it is free," Richard said, taking a massive gulp. "Tastes like money to me." I felt a tear slide down my cheek. It wasn't sadness. It was the physical pain of seeing something beautiful and valuable being consumed by people who couldn't understand its worth. It was a metaphor for my entire marriage. I had poured my best self, my finest years into this family, and they had consumed me without tasting the quality, only complaining about the bitterness. But then the conversation shifted. The alcohol had loosened their tongues. So Richie Tony said, leaning back in my dining chair and putting his feet up on the table, "With this house, you are going to be flush. When can I expect my 200 large?" I froze. 200 large, $200,000. Richard swirled the wine in his plastic cup. "Don't worry, Tony. We are listing the place on Monday. A quick sale. Cash only. We will price it low to move it fast. Maybe 1.2 million. 1.2 million. The house was appraised at 1.8. They were planning to undersell my asset by $600,000 just to get quick cash. I will pay you your $200,000 the day we close," Richard continued. "And I will still have a cool million left over to retire on. And what about my cut, Dad?" Kevin chimed in, his mouth full of pretzels. "You will get yours," Richard said. "How much do you need for that tax thing?" 50, Kevin mumbled, looking down. "The IRS sent another letter. They are talking about wage garnishment. If I don't pay the back taxes from the contracting gig by next month, they are going to audit everything." I typed furiously on my other screen. Richard Reynolds, $200,000 debt to Tony, likely illegal gambling given the terminology. Kevin Reynolds, $50,000 tax lien, potential tax evasion. This was gold. This was better than the wine. They were confessing to felonies on camera. Richard was admitting to owing money to a loan shark, which gave him a motive for fraud. Kevin was admitting to tax evasion. But it got worse. "You know," Tony said, looking at the wine bottle, "what about the girl, the wife? She puts up a fight. This sale gets dragged out for months." "I can't wait months, Richie. My bosses, they aren't patient men." Richard slammed his cup down, spilling the $5,000 wine onto the table. "She won't fight," he snarled. "She is weak. She doesn't have the stomach for it. Besides, I have leverage." "What leverage?" Kevin asked. Richard smiled, a cruel, twisted expression that made him look like a gargoyle. "I found David's old laptop in the study," he said, "the one he used before he deployed. I haven't cracked the password yet, but I know what is on there. David wasn't a saint, boys. There are emails, photos, things that would ruin his reputation as a hero if they got out. If Sarah tries to block the sale, I will threaten to leak them. She cares too much about his image. She will fold." I stared at the screen, my blood turning to ice. David was a good man, but like any soldier, he had demons. He had vented to friends in private emails about command decisions. He had shared dark humor that civilians wouldn't understand. If Richard released those out of context, he could destroy David's legacy. He was willing to blackmail me with his own son's memory. I stopped typing. A cold calm settled over me. This was no longer just about money. This was about honor. They continued to drink. They opened the second bottle of Screaming Eagle. Then the third. They toasted to their brilliant plan. They laughed about how easy it was to kick me out. I watched them until the last drop of wine was gone, and Tony stumbled out the door. I watched Kevin pass out on the sofa, my sofa. I watched Richard go upstairs and sleep in the guest room. I looked at my spreadsheet. Item 46, 1992, Screaming Eagle Cabernet times 3. Value $15,000. Status consumed. Item 47, Mahogany Dining Table. Deep scratches and alcohol damage. Value $8,000. Item 48, Antique Persian Rug. Mud and food stains. Value $12,000. But the real value was in the recording. Evidence a confession of gambling debt to organized crime. Evidence B. Confession of federal tax evasion. Evidence C. Conspiracy to commit extortion and blackmail. I saved the video file. Then I made 3 backup copies, one to the cloud, one to an external drive, and one attached to an email draft addressed to the district attorney's office. I didn't send it yet. The timing had to be perfect. I needed them to think they had won. I needed them to actually list the house. Once they signed the listing agreement with a realtor, they would be committing real estate fraud. That was the final nail in the coffin. I closed my laptop. My hands were steady. I wasn't the weak, grieving widow they thought I was. I was the predator in the tall grass, and they had just fattened themselves up for the kill. "Enjoy the wine, Richard," I whispered into the darkness of the hotel room. "It cost you $15,000, but the hangover is going to cost you your freedom." The silence of the hotel suite was broken only by the rhythmic humming of the mini fridge and the sudden violent vibration of my phone against the mahogany desk. It started as a single buzz, then another, then a continuous angry spasm that made the device dance across the polished wood like a trapped insect. I didn't pick it up immediately. I finished typing the last sentence of my email to the district attorney, saved the draft, and took a sip of cold water. Only then did I turn my attention to the glowing screen. It was midnight, the witching hour for toxic families. The poker game at my house had ended, the alcohol had settled into their bloodstreams, and they had evidently decided that their victory wasn't complete until they had broken me completely. The notifications were stacking up so fast I couldn't read them individually. They were coming from a group chat titled The Reynolds Family, a chat I had never been invited to join while David was alive. Apparently, I had been added solely for the purpose of this digital execution. I unlocked the phone. The first message was from Aunt Linda, Richard's sister, a woman who had hugged me at the funeral and whispered that God has a plan while simultaneously eyeing my pearl earrings. "Sarah, we know you took it." I frowned. Took what? I hadn't taken anything. I had been evicted with nothing but the muddy clothes on my back. The next message was a photo. It was a grainy, zoomed-in picture of my left hand taken during the funeral. Linda had circled my engagement ring in bright red markup ink. "That ring belongs to our grandmother," Linda wrote. "It is a family heirloom. It was never yours. It was on loan. Richard says you are planning to pawn it." I stared at the screen, blinking slowly. The audacity was so breathtaking it was almost impressive. The ring on my finger was a 3-carat emerald-cut diamond set in platinum. I knew its provenance perfectly because I was the one who paid for it. David had proposed to me 5 years ago with a plastic twist tie from a loaf of bread because he had sent every penny of his savings to help Richard pay off a previous gambling debt. I had laughed, cried, and said yes, wearing that twist tie proudly for 6 months. When my first major forensic audit case settled a massive embezzlement scheme involving a pharmaceutical company, I received a bonus check that could have bought a small island. I took David to the jeweler. I bought the diamond. I paid for the setting. I even paid for the insurance. There was no grandmother. There was no heirloom. Richard's mother had died penniless, leaving behind nothing but a box of recipes and a rusted sedan. "Bring it back by morning," Kevin texted. "Or we call the cops. That is grand larceny." "You are a thief," another cousin chimed in, a number I didn't even recognize. "Shame on you, stealing from a grieving father." I sat back in my chair, the blue light of the phone illuminating my face. They were rewriting reality in real time. They were gaslighting me, creating a collaborative fiction where I was the villainous gold digger running off with the family jewels. I felt a surge of temptation. The urge to type back was physical. My thumbs hovered over the keyboard. I wanted to send them the receipt. I wanted to send them the bank statement showing the wire transfer to Cartier. I wanted to scream into the digital void that they were liars and parasites. But I stopped. That was what they wanted. They wanted a fight. They wanted emotional engagement. They wanted me to get defensive, to argue, to plead. If I replied, I validated their delusion. If I argued, I gave them ammunition. The first rule of dealing with narcissists and extortionists is simple. Do not feed the beast. I put the phone down on the desk and opened a new software program on my laptop. It was a tool we used in forensic accounting to document harassment and intimidation in fraud cases. It automatically captured timestamps, sender IDs, and content, compiling them into a court-admissible PDF. I connected my phone to the laptop. I synced the messages. On the screen, the chat log unspooled like a transcript of madness. Vanessa, I saw her looking up pawn shops on her phone at the funeral. I swear, she's going to sell it for drugs. Richard, that ring is worth 50 grand. It is my mother's legacy. If she sold it, she is dead to me. Aunt Linda, we should go to her hotel. I know she is at the Ritz. Someone saw her. Let's go get it back. I watched the words appear on my monitor, categorizing them in my mind. Defamation, extortion, conspiracy to commit robbery, harassment. They were handing me a loaded gun bullet by bullet. I selected the entire thread. I clicked export to PDF. Then I opened my email client. I didn't type Richard's email address. I typed a different name, Sheriff Jim Miller. Jim had been David's best friend since boot camp. He was the one who had knocked on my door to tell me David was gone. He was the one who had held me while I collapsed on the porch. He was an honorable man, a man of the law, and he knew exactly who Richard was. He knew about the gambling. He knew about the debts. I composed the email. Subject: formal harassment report. Case file: Reynolds versus Reynolds. Attachment digital _ evidence _ log _ 01.pdf. Dear Sheriff Miller, I hope you are holding up. I am writing to formally document a series of harassing communications I have received from Richard, Kevin, and Linda Reynolds regarding my personal property. As you know, the ring I wear was purchased by me, Sarah Reynolds, on June 12, 2019, from Cartier, D.C. I have attached the receipt and the insurance rider in my name for your reference. The Reynolds family is currently sending me threats of physical confrontation and police action based on the false claim that this item is a family heirloom. They have also threatened to come to my current residence at the Ritz-Carlton to forcefully retrieve it. I am fearing for my safety. I am not replying to them to avoid escalation. I am forwarding this log to you so that there is an official record if they attempt to approach me or if they file a false police report regarding theft. Please consider this a formal request for a no-contact order to be prepared pending further legal action. Respectfully, Sarah. I hit send. The moment the email whooshed away, I felt a weight lift off my chest. I wasn't a victim cowering in a hotel room. I was a witness building a case. My phone buzzed again, a new message. This time a voice note from Richard. I pressed play. His voice filled the quiet hotel room, slurred and heavy with alcohol. Listen here, girl. You think you are smart? You think you can just walk away with my family's history on your finger? You are nothing. You are a placeholder. David knew it. We all knew it. Bring the ring back or I will make sure every employer in this town knows what a thief you are. I will ruin you. I saved the audio file, evidence _ threat _ 04.mp3. I forwarded it to Jim Miller as a follow-up. Subject: additional threat. Audio evidence. I didn't block them. Blocking them would stop the flow of evidence. I simply turned off the notifications. I silenced the ringer. I flipped the phone face down. Let them scream into the void. Let them text until their fingers bled. Every message was another brick in the prison wall I was building around them. I walked over to the minibar and poured myself a sparkling water. I looked at the ring on my finger. The emerald-cut diamond caught the light, refracting it into 1,000 tiny rainbows. It was cold, hard, and unbreakable, just like me. They wanted the ring because they thought it was a symbol of their family. They were wrong. It was a symbol of everything they weren't. It was a symbol of success earned through hard work, not inheritance. It was a symbol of love that was backed by action, not just words. I went back to the window. The rain had stopped and the city lights were reflecting off the wet pavement below. Somewhere out there in my stolen house, Richard was probably pacing the floor, staring at his phone, wondering why I wasn't begging for mercy. He was probably telling himself that I was scared, that I was guilty. He had no idea that while he was playing checkers with texts and empty threats, I was playing 4D chess with the legal system. I looked at the clock. It was 1:00 a.m. In 2 hours, my smart home system was scheduled to wake them up. In 8 hours, the sheriff would read my email. In 12 hours, the real game would begin. I sat down on the edge of the plush hotel bed, the adrenaline finally starting to fade into a dull, throbbing exhaustion. I closed my eyes, but I didn't sleep. I visualized the spreadsheet. I visualized the receipts. I visualized the look on Richard's face when the gavel finally fell. The phone buzzed one last time against the desk, a final desperate gasp from a dying dynasty. I didn't even look. I just smiled. "Keep talking, Richard," I whispered. "You're only digging faster." At 2:58 in the morning, the only light in my hotel suite came from the dual monitors of my laptop. I sat cross-legged on the chair, a cup of chamomile tea in my hand, watching the screen with the detached focus of a scientist observing lab rats in a maze. My house was silent. The camera showed a scene of conquerors resting after their invasion. In the master bedroom, my bedroom, Kevin and Vanessa were sprawled across the Egyptian cotton sheets I had bought for David's birthday. They had passed out fully clothed, the mud from their boots staining the duvet. In the guest room down the hall, Richard was snoring, the sound rhythmic and guttural, picked up clearly by the high-sensitivity microphone in the hallway thermostat. They looked peaceful. They looked like they belonged. They were wrong. I placed my tea on the coaster and cracked my knuckles. It was time to introduce them to the true personality of the house they had stolen. They thought a house was just bricks and mortar, a passive object to be claimed. They didn't understand that a modern smart home is a nervous system, and I was the brain. I checked the internal temperature readings. I had set the thermostat to 50 degrees 3 hours ago. The house was now effectively a refrigerator. I watched on the infrared camera as Kevin shivered in his sleep, instinctively curling into a ball. Vanessa tugged at the duvet, but it was bunched up under Kevin's heavy leg. Phase 1, complete, I whispered. Hypothermia initiated. Now for Phase 2. I opened the media control panel. The house was equipped with a Sonos sound system integrated into every room, including the master bath and the garage. David loved music. He loved it loud. We had installed cinema-quality subwoofers in the living room and master bedroom. I selected a track from my library. It wasn't just heavy metal. It was a track David used for tactical training simulation. It started with the sound of a blaring air raid siren, followed by aggressive, chaotic, industrial thrash metal at a tempo that induced anxiety. I hovered my mouse over the volume slider. It was currently at 0. I dragged it all the way to the right. 100%. I checked the clock. 2:59:58. 2:59:59. 3 a.m. I clicked play. On the screen, the reaction was instantaneous. The air raid siren screamed through the house, a piercing mechanical wail that shook the camera lenses. In the master bedroom, Kevin didn't just wake up. He levitated. He scrambled backward, tangling his legs in the sheets, and fell off the bed with a heavy thud. Vanessa sat bolt upright, screaming, her hands clapping over her ears, her mouth wide open in a silent shriek that was drowned out by the music. Then the drums kicked in. The subwoofers vibrated the floorboards. I could see the water in the glass on the nightstand, rippling like a scene from Jurassic Park before it vibrated off the edge and shattered. I switched the camera view to the hallway. Richard burst out of the guest room. He was wearing nothing but his boxer shorts and an undershirt. He looked like a confused, angry bear. He was spinning in circles, looking at the ceiling, looking at the walls as if the house itself were attacking him. "Make it stop," I saw him mouthing. "Make it stop!" He ran toward the master bedroom, banging on the door. "Kevin, turn it off. Turn it off." Kevin scrambled up from the floor, his eyes wild. He ran to the wall switch, slapping it repeatedly. But the wall switches only controlled the lights. They didn't control the integrated sound system. That was controlled by the server in the basement, which was locked behind a steel door, and by my laptop, which was 5 miles away in the Ritz-Carlton. I decided to add to the ambiance. I opened the lighting tab. I selected the strobe effect, a preset I had created for Halloween parties. The lights in the hallway and the bedrooms began to flash violently. On off, rapid fire. White, then red, then blue. It turned the scene into a chaotic, nightmarish disco. The camera frame rate struggled to keep up, making their movements look jerky and unnatural. Richard stumbled, blinded by the flashing lights, and slammed his shoulder into the doorframe. Vanessa was now huddled in the corner of the bed, crying, pulling a pillow over her head. I took a sip of my tea. It was still warm. The contrast between my calm environment and their absolute panic was delicious. Kevin finally found the courage to run out into the hallway. He and Richard were screaming at each other, their faces inches apart, illuminated by the strobing red light. "What did you do?" Richard bellowed, grabbing Kevin by the shoulders. "What did you touch?" "I didn't touch anything," Kevin screamed back. "The house is possessed. It just turned on." "Go to the breaker," Richard yelled. "Go to the basement and cut the power." I smiled. I had anticipated this. The smart home hub had a battery backup that would last for 4 hours. Even if they cut the main power, the security system, the cameras, and the alarms would stay active. But the music would stop. I decided to show mercy. Or rather, I decided to shift the torture to a new modality. I faded the music out. The silence that followed was deafening. The ringing in their ears must have been excruciating. The lights stopped strobing and settled into a dim, eerie red glow. They stood in the hallway, panting, their chests heaving. What the hell was that? Vanessa whimpered from the doorway, mascara running down her face. It is a malfunction, Richard wheezed, leaning against the wall. Damn technology. I told David this smart crap was a waste of money. It is probably a short circuit. A short circuit doesn't play heavy metal. Dad, Kevin said, his voice trembling. Someone turned it on. Who? Richard snapped. There is no one here but us. Do you think Sarah is hiding in the attic? They all looked up at the ceiling fan as if I might drop down like a ninja. I moved to the next tab. The kitchen. Fear makes people hungry, or at least it makes them need water. Their throats were raw from screaming. Their heads were pounding from the hangover and the noise. Let's go downstairs, Richard commanded, trying to regain his authority. I need a drink. My heart is racing like a rabbit. They descended the stairs, clutching the railing like invalids. They walked into the kitchen. The kitchen was my pride and joy. It featured a Sub-Zero smart refrigerator with a glass panel and a touchscreen interface. It was connected to the internet. It had an electronic locking mechanism for child safety, or in this case, intruder safety. Richard walked straight to the fridge. He reached for the handle. He pulled. Nothing happened. He pulled harder, bracing his foot against the bottom drawer. The door didn't budge. It is stuck, he grunted. Let me try, Kevin said. He pushed his father aside and yanked on the handle with both hands. The fridge remained sealed tight. Suddenly, the touch screen on the fridge door lit up. I had typed a custom message into the display override. The screen flashed bright blue. Text scrolled across it in large white letters. Access denied. Biometric scan required. Unauthorized user detected. What the hell? Kevin shouted, stepping back. It is asking for a fingerprint. Since when does a fridge need a fingerprint? Richard yelled, kicking the stainless steel door. Open up, you piece of junk. He kicked it again, leaving a scuff mark. I noted it for my damages spreadsheet. Item 49. Dent in Sub-Zero refrigerator. Value $500 repair cost. Vanessa walked into the kitchen, wrapped in the duvet. She looked at the fridge, then at the dark corners of the room. It is her, she whispered, her eyes wide. Don't be stupid, Richard spat. She is gone. No, Vanessa said, her voice rising in hysteria. She cursed the house. I told you. I felt it when I walked in. The air is too cold. The lights. The music. It is her spirit. Or maybe David's. Shut up, Richard roared. David is dead. This is just a glitch. He grabbed a chair from the dining table and raised it, looking like he was about to smash the glass panel of the fridge. I hovered my mouse over the unlock button. If he smashed it, it would cost me $10,000 to replace. I didn't want them to break the expensive assets. I just wanted them to suffer. But before he could swing, Kevin grabbed his arm. Dad, stop. If you break it, we can't sell it. The realtor said the appliances are a huge selling point. Richard lowered the chair, breathing heavily. He looked at the fridge with pure hatred. Fine, he snarled. We drink tap water. He went to the sink and turned the handle. I had already engaged the solenoid valve on the main water line via the leak detection system. A few drops of water sputtered out, then nothing. No water, Richard said, his voice hollow. The pipes must be frozen, Kevin said, rubbing his arms. It is freezing in here. Why is it so cold? I checked the thermostat. 48 degrees. I watched them standing there in the dim red light of my kitchen. Thirsty, cold, terrified, confused. They looked less like the arrogant conquerors of yesterday and more like rats trapped in a box. This house hates us, Vanessa sobbed, sliding down the cabinets to sit on the floor. We have to leave. We have to go to a hotel. No. Richard slammed his fist on the counter. We are not leaving. That is what she wants. She wants to scare us out. I am not letting a few glitches and a cold draft take $1 million out of my pocket. We stay. We put on coats. We sleep in the living room. He looked directly at the camera in the corner of the ceiling, though he didn't know I was watching. You hear me? He shouted at the empty room. You can't scare me. I am Richard Reynolds. This is my house. I smiled at the screen. "Oh, Richard," I murmured. "I am not trying to scare you. I am just running a diagnostic, and you just failed the stress test." I decided to let them have a few hours of silence, let them fall back asleep cold and thirsty, let them think it was over. Because the real show was scheduled for 7 a.m. That was when the automated lawn sprinklers were set to target the single pane glass of the living room windows, and the robotic vacuum cleaners were scheduled to start their cleaning cycle, all 5 of them at once. I closed the browser tab for the house controls. I felt a strange sense of calm. It wasn't happiness exactly. It was the satisfaction of restoring balance. They had brought chaos into my life, so I had returned it to them amplified by technology. I finished my tea, washed the cup in the hotel sink, and finally lay down on the bed. For the first time since David died, I closed my eyes and didn't see his funeral. I saw Richard pulling on a locked fridge handle. And for the first time in days, I slept. The sun rose over Washington, D.C., casting a pale gray light across the unmade bed of my hotel suite. I had not slept since my brief nap earlier. The room was silent, save for the hum of the high-performance laptop cooling fans. I sat at the mahogany desk, a pot of black coffee beside me, my hair tied back in a severe bun. I was no longer Sarah the grieving widow. I was Sarah the senior forensic accountant, and I was about to perform the most aggressive audit of my career. In my line of work, we have a saying: people lie, but numbers don't. People can fake tears at a funeral. People can fake love in a marriage. But they cannot fake a bank transfer. They cannot fake a tax return. Every dollar a person touches leaves a digital fingerprint, a residue of intent that sticks to them forever. Richard and Kevin thought they had erased me from the house, but they didn't realize that by declaring war on me, they had invited the IRS, the FBI, and the Department of Justice into their lives, all channeled through my fingertips. I opened my primary software suite. It was a proprietary program used by my firm to trace assets in high-stakes divorce and corporate fraud cases. Because David and I had joint finances, and because Richard had foolishly used David as a co-signer on several old loans years ago, my clearance allowed me to legally access a spiderweb of family financial data that they thought was private. I didn't need to hack. I just needed to look where nobody else had bothered to look. I started with Kevin Reynolds, 30 years old, self-proclaimed entrepreneur. He drove a leased BMW he couldn't afford and posted photos of stacks of cash on Instagram. To the outside world, he was a hustler. To me, he was a walking red flag. I pulled up his credit report first. It was a disaster, a score of 520, maxed out credit cards. But that wasn't the crime. Being bad with money isn't illegal. What I was looking for was the discrepancy between his lifestyle and his reported income. I accessed the public tax records database. I cross-referenced his Social Security number against filed returns for the last 5 years. The screen refreshed. No record found for 2019. No record found for 2020. No record found for 2021. I leaned back, a cold smile touching my lips. Kevin hadn't filed a tax return in 3 years. According to the United States government, Kevin Reynolds had zero income. He was a ghost. But ghosts don't buy BMWs. I pulled up his bank statements from a joint account he shared with David years ago, an account David had forgotten to close, and one I still had view-only access to because my name was on the trust. Kevin used it as a pass-through entity. I saw the deposits. They weren't paychecks. They were hundreds of transfers from Venmo, Cash App, and Zelle. $200, $500, $300. The memos were vague. Consulting, job, help. I drilled deeper. I cross-referenced the names of the senders. Many of them were local small business owners, construction guys, landscapers. I realized what Kevin was doing. He was working under the table. He was doing unlicensed contracting work, taking cash or digital transfers, and hiding every single penny from the IRS. He was living a tax-free life while using public roads, public services, and claiming unemployment benefits during the pandemic. I pulled up the unemployment database. There it was. Kevin Reynolds, claimant. He had collected $20,000 in unemployment benefits while simultaneously depositing $40,000 of unreported income into this side account. "That is wire fraud, Kevin," I whispered to the screen. "That is theft of government funds. That is up to 20 years in federal prison." I highlighted the transactions. I created a pivot table. I organized the data into a clear, undeniable timeline. Column A, date. Column B, unreported income. Column C, unemployment check cashed. The total unreported income for the last 3 years was over $150,000. The total unpaid taxes, including penalties and interest, would destroy him. He wouldn't just lose the house he was trying to steal. He would be in debt to the federal government for the rest of his life. I saved the file. Case _ file _ Kevin _ tax _ fraud .xlsx. I took a sip of coffee. It was cold, but I didn't care. The caffeine was just fuel for the fire. Now for the big fish, Richard. Richard was smarter than Kevin. He was older, more cautious. He presented himself as a retired patriot, a man who lived on a fixed pension and the love of his country. But I knew Richard. I knew he had a gambling problem that he claimed was cured 10 years ago. I pulled up Richard's main checking account. Again, I had access because David had been a signatory on it to help his dad manage bills after his mom died. Richard had never removed him, and by extension, as the executor of David's estate, I had the legal right to audit the account to ensure no estate assets were commingled. It was a legal loophole, and I was driving a tank through it. The pension deposits were there, $2,000 a month. Standard. Barely enough to cover the mortgage on his own rundown condo, let alone the lifestyle he projected. But then I saw the withdrawals. A TM withdrawal. Casino Niagara. $500. A TM withdrawal. MGM National Harbor. $800. He was gambling again. Heavily. But that wasn't the smoking gun. Gambling is legal. Losing your pension at the blackjack table is sad, but not a crime. I looked closer at the deposits. January 12th, $9,000 cash deposit. February 14th, $9,500 cash deposit. March 3rd, $9,000 cash deposit. My eyes narrowed. In the banking world, any cash deposit over $10,000 triggers a CTR, a currency transaction report, which is sent to the federal government to prevent money laundering. Richard was depositing amounts just under the threshold, $9,000, $9,500. This is called structuring. It is a federal crime. It is the act of intentionally breaking up deposits to evade reporting requirements. It is the hallmark of money laundering. But where was the money coming from? A retired man doesn't just stumble upon $9,000 in cash every month. I looked at the dates of the deposits. They always happened on a Tuesday. I remembered the poker game from last night. The sketchy men. Tony. I searched the name Tony in the local court records database, cross-referencing with Richard's known associates, Anthony Tony Moretti, 2 prior convictions for illegal bookmaking and running an unlicensed gambling operation. The pieces clicked together like a majestic, terrible puzzle. Richard wasn't just a player. He was a runner. He was working for Tony. He was likely collecting debts or moving cash for an illegal underground casino operation, using his own bank account to wash the money before transferring it out to shell companies. I followed the money out. The $9,000 would come in on Tuesday. By Friday, it would be transferred out via wire to an LLC called Blue Water Consulting. I looked up Blue Water Consulting in the state business registry. It was a Delaware LLC. Anonymous. But I had a tool for that too. I checked the registered agent. I checked the address. It was a P.O. box in a strip mall in Atlantic City. I checked the signature on the incorporation documents. It was illegible, but the notary stamp was from a woman named Maria Moretti, Tony's wife. Got you, I breathed. Richard was a money mule. He was laundering proceeds from illegal gambling through his personal accounts to make them look like legitimate consulting fees for Tony's organization. He was aiding and abetting organized crime. I felt a wave of nausea mixed with triumph. This was the man who had stood at the pulpit and talked about David's honor. This was the man who had called me a gold digger. All the while he was washing dirty money for the mob. I looked at the timeline. He had been doing this for 10 years. I scrolled back to 2018, the year David and I bought our house, the year Richard asked David for a loan of $10,000 because he was in a tight spot. I checked the bank statement for that month. David had wired him $10,000. 2 days later, Richard had withdrawn it in cash at a casino in West Virginia. He had stolen from his own son. He had taken money that David earned getting shot at in a desert, and he had fed it into a slot machine. My hands shook as I typed. I wasn't just an accountant anymore. I was an executioner. I compiled the evidence. Exhibit A, pattern of structuring deposits to evade. CTR requirements. Exhibit B, direct link to known felon Anthony Moretti. Exhibit C, wire transfers to shell companies linked to organized crime. The total amount laundered through Richard's account over the last decade was nearly $1.2 million. This wasn't just a tax audit. This was a RICO case. The Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. It was the nuclear option. I sat back, the magnitude of what I held in my hands sinking in. I could send Richard to prison for 20 years. I could seize every asset he owned, but I wasn't done. I needed to tie it all together. I needed to make sure that when the hammer fell, it fell on all of them at once. I opened a new document, the master narrative. I began to write the cover letter that would accompany this dossier to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, to Special Agent in Charge. I am writing to report a complex money laundering and tax evasion scheme involving Richard Reynolds and Kevin Reynolds. The attached evidence demonstrates a decade-long pattern of structuring wire fraud and association with illegal gambling operations. Furthermore, the subjects are currently attempting to liquidate real estate assets obtained through fraudulent claims to fund their flight or further criminal activities. I attached the spreadsheet of Kevin's tax fraud. I attached the PDF of Richard's bank statements. I attached the video of the poker game where they discussed the debt to Tony. The video was the linchpin. In the video, Richard admitted he owed Tony money. It proved the motive. He wasn't stealing my house because of tradition or bloodline. He was stealing my house because he had laundered money, lost some of it, and now the mob wanted their cut. He was selling David's legacy to pay off a loan shark. I closed my eyes, letting the anger wash over me, purifying me. "David," I whispered, "I am sorry I didn't see it sooner. I am sorry I let him manipulate you, but I promise you I am going to balance the books." I looked at the clock. It was now 6 a.m. The sun had fully risen. In the house, the sprinklers were about to turn on. The robotic vacuums were about to start their noisy parade. But those were just pranks. Those were just to keep them tired and on edge. The real weapon was sitting on my hard drive. A 3-gigabyte file that contained the destruction of the Reynolds family name. I didn't hit send yet. I needed one more thing. I needed them to commit the final act of fraud. I needed them to sign the listing agreement with the realtor. Once they claimed legal ownership of the house on a federal document and tried to sell it, the trap would be sealed. They would be crossing the line from family dispute to real estate fraud. I picked up my phone. I dialed the number of a realtor I knew, a shark of a woman named Brenda, who I had used for investment properties before. "Brenda," I said when she answered, her voice groggy with sleep. "Sarah, is everything okay? I heard about David. I am so sorry." "I am fine, Brenda. Listen, I have a tip for you. My father-in-law, Richard Reynolds, is going to try to list my house today. He thinks he owns it." "Oh my God," Brenda gasped. "Do you want me to stop him?" "No," I said, my voice cold and hard like steel. "I want you to take the listing. I want you to let him sign every single paper. I want you to let him believe he is going to be rich. And then as soon as the ink is dry, I want you to send me a copy of the contract." "Sarah, are you sure that sounds risky?" "It is not risky, Brenda. It is a sting operation. Just get his signature. Can you do that for me?" There was a pause. Then I heard the smile in Brenda's voice. "For you, Sarah, I will bring the champagne." I hung up. The trap was set. The evidence was compiled. The financial forensic audit was complete. I stood up and walked to the mirror. I looked tired. My eyes were red. My skin was pale. But I looked dangerous. I wasn't just a widow. I was the CFO of their destruction, and the shareholder meeting was about to begin. The sun was fully up now, casting harsh, unforgiving beams of light across the scatter of papers on my hotel desk. I had spent the last 2 hours building a RICO case against my father-in-law, documenting his money laundering and tax evasion. I thought I had seen the worst of it. I thought I had uncovered the full extent of his betrayal. I believed that his crime was simply greed, a desperate old man trying to fund a gambling addiction by scratching at the edges of his wealthy son's life. I was wrong. I had been looking at Richard's finances. Now I turned my attention back to David's. Specifically, I went to the credit monitoring service that we shared. David and I were meticulous about our credit scores. We both maintained scores above 800. It was a point of pride. We paid off our balances in full every month. We had no debt other than the primary mortgage on the house, which was at a historic low interest rate of 2.5%. I logged into the dashboard. The screen refreshed, and a red notification banner appeared at the top. Alert. Significant drop in credit score detected. My heart skipped a beat. I clicked on the details. David's score had dropped from 820 to 680. A drop of 140 points. That is impossible, I whispered. I scrolled down to the factors affecting the score. Factor 1, high credit utilization. Factor 2, new delinquent account. Factor 3, new derogatory public record. My hands started to tremble. David had been dead for 3 days. How could he have a new delinquent account? I clicked on the trade lines. There, buried under the list of our standard credit cards, was a loan I had never seen before. Lender Shadow Creek Capital. Type secured real estate loan. Balance $150,000. Status past due. Opened 6 months ago. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. $150,000. Secured real estate loan. That meant a second mortgage, a home equity line of credit. But we didn't need a loan. We had plenty of cash in the bank. And even if David had wanted to take out a loan for some secret project, he would have told me. We discussed every purchase over $500. It was our rule. I minimized the credit report and opened a new tab for the county clerk's land records database. In Virginia, all property liens are public record. If this loan was real, if it was secured against our house, there had to be a deed of trust recorded with the county. I searched our address. The search results populated. Deed of trust. Primary mortgage. 2018. Deed of trust. Secondary lien. August 14th, 2023. August 14th. I froze. The date burned into my retinas. August 14th was the day David deployed for his final tour. I remembered it vividly. I remembered driving him to the base. I remembered the tearful goodbye at the gate. I remembered coming home to an empty house and crying on the floor for hours. David was on a C-17 transport plane on August 14th. He was physically incapable of signing a loan document in a notary's office in Virginia. I clicked on the PDF icon to view the document. The scanned image loaded slowly, pixel by pixel, revealing the architecture of a crime so personal it made me want to vomit. It was a standard deed of trust securing a loan of $150,000 against our home. The interest rate was predatory 24%. The terms were draconian. If a single payment was missed, the lender had the right to immediate foreclosure. I scrolled to the bottom of the last page, to the signature line. There in blue ink was the name David Reynolds. At first glance, it looked like his signature. David had a very specific way of signing his name. Sharp, angular, precise, a military signature. He crossed his T's with a firm, flat line. But I was a forensic accountant. I didn't just look at signatures. I analyzed them. I knew the pressure points of a pen. I knew the flow of ink. I zoomed in on the signature until it filled the screen. It was a good forgery, a very good forgery. Someone had practiced. But there were telltale signs of hesitation. Point 1, the capital D. David always wrote his D in one continuous fluid motion. This D had a microscopic break at the top of the loop where the pen had lifted slightly, as if the writer was checking a reference image. Point 2, the slant. David's handwriting slanted slightly to the right, consistent with a right-handed person writing quickly. This signature was vertical stiff, as if drawn rather than written. Point 3. The pressure dots. At the end of the name Reynolds there was a heavy ink blot where the pen had rested for a fraction of a second too long. David never rested his pen. He signed and lifted in a single flourish. It wasn't David. I looked at the notary public stamp next to the signature. State of Virginia, commission expires 2025. Name Vanessa Williams. I blinked. Vanessa, my sister-in-law, Kevin's wife. She wasn't a notary. She worked part-time at a tanning salon. I quickly searched the Virginia Secretary of State's database for commissioned notaries. Vanessa Williams, no record found. She had bought a fake notary stamp online. They had forged the signature. They had forged the notarization. And then Richard had taken this fraudulent document to a hard money lender, likely one of Tony's associates who didn't ask too many questions, and leveraged my home for $150,000 cash. Where did the money go? I went back to the bank records I had pulled earlier. I looked at the dates around August 14th, August 16th. Deposit, $145,000 after fees. August 17th, wire transfer, $100,000 to T. Moretti Holdings. August 18th, purchase, Range Rover Sport, $45,000. I sat back in my chair, the breath leaving my body in a long, shuddering exhale. They didn't just steal from David. They stole his name. They stole his honor. While he was putting on his uniform, packing his gear, and preparing to go to a war zone to defend his country, his father and brother were sitting at his kitchen table practicing his signature, selling his safety to pay off a gambling debt and buy a luxury car. The Range Rover. I had seen that car. Kevin drove it. He told everyone he had leased it with profits from his crypto investments. It was bought with David's blood. A new emotion washed over me, deeper and darker than the anger I had felt before. Anger is hot. It burns fast. This was hatred. Cold, black, absolute hatred. I thought about the last video call I had with David. He looked tired. He had dark circles under his eyes. He had asked me nervously if we were okay on money. "Honey," he had said, his voice cracking over the poor satellite connection. "Dad said things are tight back home. He said the economy is bad. Do we need to sell the other car? Should I sign up for another tour to get the bonus?" I had been so confused. "David, we are fine," I had assured him. "We have savings. Why is your dad telling you we are broke?" "He is just looking out for us," David had said. "He worries." He wasn't worrying. He was gaslighting his own son. Richard was planting seeds of financial anxiety in David's mind, so that if this loan ever came to light, David might think he had authorized it during a moment of stress and forgotten. Or worse, Richard was trying to guilt David into sending more money. They had tortured him psychologically while he was in a combat zone. I looked at the screen at the forged signature that represented the ultimate betrayal. "You killed him," I whispered. "Maybe not with a bullet, but you killed his peace. You killed his trust. You made his last months on earth filled with worry about a financial crisis that didn't exist." I felt tears pricking my eyes, but they weren't tears of grief. They were tears of fury. I opened a new evidence folder. I named it the nuclear option. I dragged the forged deed of trust into the folder. I dragged the fake notary verification into the folder. I dragged the bank transfer records showing the purchase of the Range Rover. This wasn't just fraud anymore. This was identity theft. This was forgery of a public record. This was bank fraud. And because they had used the mail and the internet to facilitate it, it was wire fraud. Mandatory minimum sentences for aggravated identity theft added 2 years to every other count. I picked up my phone. I needed to make a call. Not to the police, not yet. I needed to call the lender, Shadow Creek Capital. I dialed the number on the loan document. It rang 4 times before a gruff voice answered. "Shadow Creek, this is Sarah Reynolds," I said, my voice eerily calm. "You hold a second lien on my property at 42 Oakwood Drive." "Yeah, I know the property," the man said. "You are 3 months behind, lady. We are starting foreclosure proceedings next week. We were just waiting for the funeral to be over." Classy, right? "Listen to me very carefully," I said. "That loan was obtained through fraud. The signature is a forgery. The borrower was out of the country on active military duty on the date of signing. I have the flight manifests, I have the passport stamps, and I have the forensic handwriting analysis." There was silence on the other end of the line. Hard money lenders are predators, but they are terrified of federal investigations. They operate in the gray areas. They don't want the FBI looking at their books. "What do you want?" the man asked, his voice dropping an octave. "I want the original loan documents," I said, "the ones with the wet ink signatures. I want you to scan them and email them to me within 5 minutes. If you do that, I will list you as a cooperating witness when I file the federal report. If you don't, I will list you as a co-conspirator. You can't prove I knew it was fake. I can prove you didn't do due diligence," I countered. "You lent $150,000 without meeting the borrower. You accepted a notarization from a woman who doesn't exist in the state database. That is negligence at best, complicity at worst. Do you want to lose your lending license, or do you want to help me bury the man who scammed us both?" A pause, then the sound of papers shuffling. "What is your email address?" I gave it to him. 5 minutes later, the high-resolution scan arrived in my inbox. It was even better than the public record. The wet ink showed the indentation of the pen. It showed the hesitation marks clearly. And at the bottom, there was a thumbprint. A thumbprint required by the lender for verification. It wasn't David's thumbprint. David had a scar on his right thumb from a carpentry accident when he was a teenager. This print was smooth, bulbous. It was Richard's thumbprint. He had literally left his biometric data on the scene of the crime. I stared at the thumbprint on the screen. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. It was a perfect swirling spiral of guilt. "I am going to destroy you, Richard," I said to the image. "I am going to take the house. I am going to take the car. I'm going to take your pension, and then I'm going to take your freedom." I saved the file. I looked at the clock. It was now 8:30 a.m. The realtor Brenda would be arriving at the house in 30 minutes with the listing agreement. Richard would be there hungover, desperate, thinking he was about to cash in. He would sign the listing agreement, committing one final act of fraud to seal his fate. I needed to be ready. I closed the laptop and stood up. I walked to the bathroom and turned on the shower. I needed to wash the hotel air off me. I needed to put on my armor. I chose a black suit, sharp, tailored, professional. The kind of suit I wore when I was presenting evidence to a grand jury. I pulled my hair back tight. I applied my makeup with surgical precision. Red lipstick, not too bright but bold enough to be seen from a distance. I looked in the mirror. Sarah the widow was gone. Sarah the executioner was staring back. They had binned David's things. They had mocked my grief. They had stolen his money. But the unforgivable sin, the one that ensured I would never show them an ounce of mercy, was that they had made him feel small when he was a giant. They had used his name to build a cage of debt, thinking he would never find out. Well, David found out, through me, and his ghost was about to bring the walls down on top of them. I grabbed my briefcase. I grabbed the folder labeled "The Nuclear Option." I walked out of the hotel room, the door clicking shut behind me with the sound of a pistol cocking. It was time to go home. The phone rang at 10:14 in the morning. It was not a number stored in my contacts, but it was a number I had memorized 3 hours ago. It belonged to Golden Glory Pawn, a high-end shop on the outskirts of Alexandria that specialized in luxury goods. I knew they were the only shop in a 20-mile radius that had the cash reserves to handle the kind of merchandise Vanessa had stolen. I picked up on the first ring. "This is Sarah," I said, my voice steady. "Mrs. Reynolds," a gravelly voice answered. "This is Frank Russo. You sent me an email this morning with a list of serial numbers. I did, Mr. Russo. Do you have a customer matching the description?" "I certainly do," Russo said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "A young woman, African-American, wearing a red dress that looks like it cost more than my car. She just walked in with 2 large dust bags and a jewelry box. She is acting nervous, looking at the door every 5 seconds. I closed my eyes, visualizing the scene. Vanessa was predictable. She needed cash for the renovation she had bragged about on Instagram, or maybe just to pay off the credit card debt I had uncovered in my audit. She thought she could liquidate my assets, and no one would notice until she was long gone. "What is she trying to sell, Frank?" I asked. Russo paused. I could hear the sound of a zipper being pulled in the background. "She has got a Chanel Classic Flap black caviar leather, gold hardware, and a David Yurman cable bracelet with citrine stones, and, hold on." I heard the click of a jeweler's loop. She has got a platinum band with 3 emerald-cut diamonds. Looks like 3 carats total weight. My hand tightened around the phone. The engagement ring. She had actually stolen the ring off my dresser while I was packing, or maybe she had taken it from the jewelry cleaner machine in the master bath. That ring wasn't just metal and stone. It was the first significant promise I had made to myself after I paid off my student loans. "Is it on the list?" Frank asked. "It is," I confirmed. "That is my property, stolen from my residence within the last 48 hours. "Okay," Russo said, his tone hardening. "I have the silent alarm button right here under the counter. I can have the police here in 3 minutes. Do you want me to stall her until they get here?" I hesitated. It was the logical choice. The police would come. They would arrest her. She would be charged with possession of stolen goods. It would be over. But it would be too easy. If the police arrested her now, she could claim it was a misunderstanding. She could say she was just getting them appraised. She could say Richard gave them to her, and she didn't know they were mine. It would be a messy, she said, domestic dispute. The charges might get dropped. I needed her to commit the crime. I needed the transaction to be finalized. In the eyes of the law, there is a massive difference between possession of stolen property and trafficking in stolen property. Once she took the cash and signed the pawn ticket, she was sealing her fate in ink. "No, Frank," I said. "Coldel. Do not call the police." Russo sounded surprised. "You want me to let her walk? I want you to buy them," I said. "Buy them, Mrs. Reynolds? I can't knowingly buy stolen goods. That puts my license at risk. You are acting as a cooperating witness in a federal investigation." I lied smoothly. "I'm authorizing the transaction. I want you to offer her a price, a low price. Make her desperate. Make her sign the ticket with her driver's license number. Capture her face clearly on your security camera receiving the cash. I will reimburse you immediately via wire transfer for the cost of the buy, plus a consultation fee for your trouble. I just need the receipt." There was a long silence on the other end. Russo was weighing the risk. But he knew who I was. He knew my firm. He knew I didn't play games. "All right," he said finally, "but I am keeping the goods in the safe until you come get them. I am not reselling this hot merchandise." "Deal," I said. "Put me on speaker, but mute your end. I want to hear her." I heard a click, and suddenly the background noise of the pawn shop filled my hotel room. I heard the hum of the air conditioner, the street traffic outside, and then Vanessa's voice. "So how much?" she asked. Her voice was high, tight, impatient. "And don't lowball me. I know what these are worth. The bag alone is 10 grand retail." I heard Russo clear his throat. He was a professional. He knew exactly how to play a desperate amateur. "Retail is retail," Miss Russo said, his voice flat and unimpressed. "This is the secondary market. And this bag, it has a scratch on the hardware. No box, no authenticity card. I take a risk buying this. It is brand new," Vanessa snapped. "It was a gift from my husband. He bought it last month in Paris." I smirked. David had never been to Paris, and Vanessa had never left the tri-state area. And the ring, Russo continued, ignoring her lie. "The diamonds are decent quality, but the setting is personalized. See here, there is an engraving inside the band." I felt a pang in my chest. I knew that engraving. It said, "Per aspera ad astra, through hardships to the stars." It was my personal motto. "I have to melt the setting down," Russo said. "I am just paying for the stones." Vanessa huffed. "Fine, just give me a number. I have a contractor waiting at my house. I am in a hurry. I will give you 2,000 for the bag, 500 for the bracelet, and 1,500 for the ring. 4,000 total. Cash." "That is robbery," Vanessa shrieked. "The ring is worth 20,000. "Then take it to a jeweler and wait 3 weeks for a consignment check," Russo said, sliding the items back toward her. "Or take 4,000 cash right now." I held my breath. This was the moment. The greed versus the ego. Vanessa was silent. I could hear her tapping her fingernails on the glass counter. $4,000 wasn't a lot. But to someone like Vanessa, who was drowning in debt and trying to project a millionaire lifestyle, $4 grand was a lifeline. It was enough to buy the paint for the living room. It was enough to make a payment on the Range Rover. "Fine," she said, her voice dripping with resentment. "Give me the money. Need your ID," Russo said. "State law." I heard the slap of a plastic card on the counter. "Sign here," Russo said, "and thumbprint here." I listened to the scratch of the pen on paper. That sound was more beautiful to me than any symphony. It was the sound of a felony conviction being formalized. "Here you go," Russo said. The sound of a cash-counting machine whirring filled the line. Vanessa didn't say thank you. She grabbed the money. "You know what?" she said, her voice regaining some of its arrogance now that she had cash in hand. "You got a deal today. When I come back with my mother-in-law's fur coats, I expect a better rate." I almost laughed. She was already planning her next heist. She was going to strip my house to the studs if I let her. She walked out. I heard the door chime jingle. Russo picked up the phone. "She is gone, Sarah. You get all that I did, Frank. You are a lifesaver. Scan that pawn ticket and email it to me. I am wiring you $5,000 right now. Keep the extra $1,000 as a thank you. I will hold the items in the safe," Russo said. "I assume you will be coming by with the sheriff soon, Frank. Very soon." I hung up the phone and waited. 2 minutes later, my email pinged. I opened the attachment. It was a high-resolution scan of the Virginia pawnbroker transaction form. It had everything. Seller name, Vanessa Williams. Address 42 Oakwood Drive, my address. She had already updated her license or lied about it. Items sold: 1 Chanel handbag, 1 diamond ring, 1 bracelet. Declaration of ownership: I, the undersigned, declare that I am the sole owner of these items and have the legal right to sell them. And at the bottom, her signature and her thumbprint. I opened my master spreadsheet. Tab Crimes, Row 4, Trafficking in Stolen Property. Value $25,000, market value. Evidence signed: pawn ticket plus video surveillance plus witness testimony. In Virginia, larceny of anything over $1,000 is a felony punishable by up to 20 years in prison. Vanessa had just sold $4,000 worth of goods. But the market value, the value I would claim on the police report, was what mattered. She hadn't just committed a crime. She had destroyed her future for $4,000. I looked at the image of the ring description on the receipt. Engraving, per aspera ad astra. She didn't even read the inscription. She didn't know what it meant. She held my struggle, my triumph, and my history in her hands, and she sold it for quick cash to impress people she didn't like. It was almost tragic. But then I remembered the way she had looked at me at the funeral, the way she had pushed me aside, the way she had thrown my clothes into the mud. The tragedy wasn't hers. The tragedy was that she thought she could get away with it. I saved the file into the folder marked "The Nuclear Option." I stood up and walked to the window. The city was bustling below. People were going to work, buying coffee, living their normal lives. They had no idea that in room 412 of the Ritz-Carlton, a woman was systematically disassembling a family like a bomb disposal unit, taking apart an explosive device. Vanessa was probably driving home right now, counting the cash, feeling rich. She would stop at Starbucks. She might even buy a new pair of shoes to replace the ones she broke. She would walk into my house, into the cold, dark, music-blaring house, and feel like a winner. Let her have her moment. Because the pawn ticket she just signed was the first link in a chain that would drag her down to a place where designer bags and cash didn't matter. I checked the time. It was almost noon. Richard was meeting the realtor at 1 o'clock. Vanessa had played her part. Now it was Richard's turn to sign his life away. I smoothed the front of my blazer. I picked up my phone and dialed the number for the local sheriff's department non-emergency line. I didn't want to report the crime yet. I wanted to schedule an appointment. "Sheriff Miller, please," I said when the dispatcher answered. "Tell him it is Sarah Reynolds. Tell him I have the evidence he needs to issue 4 arrest warrants." I waited for the line to connect, listening to the hold music. It was a calm classical piece. It suited the mood. The chaos was over. Now it was just a matter of procedure. "Hello," Sarah. Jim Miller's voice came on the line. He sounded tired. "I got your emails. This is a lot, Sarah. Are you sure about all this?" "I am sure, Jim. And I just got one more piece for the puzzle. Vanessa just sold my engagement ring to a pawn shop. I have the receipt." Jim sighed, a heavy, weary sound. "Damn it. I knew they were greedy, but I didn't think they were stupid. They are both, Jim. And I am coming over to show you exactly how stupid they are. I hung up. I grabbed my bag. I didn't need the ring back today. I knew where it was. It was safe in Frank Russo's vault. It was safer there than it had ever been in that house. I walked out of the hotel room, my heels clicking on the marble floor. 1 down, 2 to go. I sat in my car, parked 2 blocks away from my own house, the engine idling silently. The rain had started again, drumming a nervous rhythm against the roof, but inside the vehicle the air was still and heavy. I had my laptop open on the passenger seat, tethered to my phone's hotspot. I was waiting for Sheriff Miller to call me back with the signed warrants, but my eyes were glued to the screen, watching the final act of my family's tragedy play out in high definition. Richard was in the living room. He was pacing back and forth, agitated, checking his watch every 30 seconds. The realtor Brenda was due to arrive in an hour to sign the listing agreement. Richard was desperate. He needed everything to look perfect. He needed to feel like the master of the house. But more than that, he needed something valuable to hold on to right now, a talisman of wealth to calm his shaking hands. He was rummaging through the shelves, pulling books down, shaking them to see if money fell out. He checked the vases. He checked the underside of the drawers. He was hunting for the hidden stash he was convinced David must have had. In Richard's world, everyone was a liar, everyone was holding out on him, and everyone had a secret pile of cash taped under a floorboard. He couldn't conceive of a man like David who kept his money in a bank and his secrets in his heart. Then he stopped. His eyes locked onto the top shelf of the built-in bookcase next to the fireplace. I froze. I knew what was up there. It was pushed all the way to the back, hidden behind a row of encyclopedias. It was an old, battered ammunition crate made of dark wood and reinforced steel corners. It didn't look like much to an outsider. It looked like garage clutter. But to me and to David, it was the most valuable object in the world. It was David's memory box. "Don't touch it, Richard," I whispered to the screen, my fingernails digging into the leather of the steering wheel. "Just walk away." But Richard didn't walk away. He dragged a chair over. He climbed up his heavy boots, scuffing the finish I had hand-polished, and pulled the crate down. The wood groaned as it hit the coffee table. Richard stared at the heavy padlock on the front. He didn't look for a key. He didn't have the patience. He walked to the fireplace, grabbed the heavy iron poker, and jammed it into the hasp. He leveraged his weight against it. The wood splintered. The metal screeched. My heart hammered against my ribs. That box contained the things David couldn't bear to look at every day, but couldn't bear to throw away. It held the shrapnel the doctors had pulled out of his leg in Kandahar. It held the flag that had draped his best friend's coffin. It held every letter I had written him during his 3 deployments, tied together with a piece of paracord. It held his bronze star. It held his purple heart. Snap. The lock gave way. Richard threw the lid back. His eyes widened, expecting to see stacks of $100 bills. He expected gold coins. He expected the spoils of war. He reached in and grabbed a handful of letters. He stared at them, confused. He shook them, waiting for a check to fall out. Nothing but lined paper covered in my handwriting fell to the table. "What is this garbage?" Richard muttered. His voice picked up clearly by the camera microphone. He tossed the letters aside like they were junk mail. He dug deeper. He pulled out the small velvet box containing the Purple Heart. He popped it open. He looked at the metal. He sneered. "A piece of tin," he spat. "Can't pawn a piece of tin? Nobody buys these anymore." He threw the metal onto the pile of rejected items. It clattered against the table, sliding off the edge and falling onto the floor. My breath hitched. That metal represented the blood David had spilled. It represented the night I got the call that he had been medevaced to Germany. It represented the months of physical therapy, the nightmares, the pain he hid from everyone but me. And his father just threw it on the floor like a bottle cap. "Where is the money?" Richard shouted at the empty room, kicking the table leg. "You cheap, ungrateful son. You made all that money contracting, and you left me nothing, just a box of trash." He reached back into the box. He pulled out a small, sealed envelope. I stopped breathing. That envelope was marked to Sarah. "Open only if I don't come back." It was the final letter, the one he wrote before his last mission. We had never opened it because he did come back. We had kept it as a talisman, a reminder of how lucky we were. I hadn't even read it yet. I wasn't ready. I was saving it for a moment when I felt strong enough to hear his voice from beyond the grave. Richard held the letter up to the light. He saw the writing on the front. To Sarah, he read aloud, mocking David's handwriting. "Boo-hoo, open if I die." He ripped it open. He didn't read it with reverence. He scanned it, his eyes darting back and forth, looking for numbers, looking for account details, looking for a will. "Listen to this, sap," Richard scoffed, reading from the paper. "Sarah, you are my compass. If I am lost, know that I found my way home to you in my heart." Richard laughed, a harsh barking sound that grated on my soul. "Pathetic," he sneered. He was soft. That is why he died. He was too busy writing poetry to watch his six. The rage that exploded in my chest was unlike anything I had ever felt. It wasn't hot. It wasn't red. It was absolute zero. It was the complete cessation of all human empathy for the man on the screen. He wasn't a father. He wasn't a human being. He was a cancer. Richard crumpled the letter in his fist. "Well, if there is no money in it, it is just kindling," he announced. He turned toward the fireplace. The gas logs were burning steadily, casting a warm glow over his cruel face. "No!" I screamed inside the car, my voice trapped behind the glass. "No, Richard. Do not do it." He threw the crumpled letter into the fire. I watched the paper catch. I watched the edges curl and turn black. I watched David's final words to me. The words I had never read turn into smoke and vanish up the chimney. Richard wasn't done. He grabbed the bundle of my letters. He threw them in. He grabbed the flag, the folded triangle of American glory. He hesitated for a second, perhaps a flicker of old patriotism kicking in, but then his greed overrode it. "Dust collector," he grumbled and tossed the flag onto the flames. Finally, he saw the Purple Heart on the floor. He kicked it. He literally kicked it with the toe of his boot, sending it skittering across the hearth and into the fire. I watched the ribbon catch fire. I watched the gold plating blacken. Richard stood there, hands on his hips, watching his son's legacy burn. He looked satisfied. He looked like he was cleaning up a mess. "Cleaning house," he muttered. "New start. No more ghosts." I stared at the screen. My hands had stopped shaking. My heart had slowed down to a rhythmic, deadly thud. The tears that had been welling in my eyes dried up instantly. There was no room for sadness anymore. Sadness is a passive emotion. Sadness is for people who accept their loss. I did not accept this. He hadn't just stolen a house. He hadn't just stolen money. He had committed a spiritual murder. He had taken the sacred remnants of a hero and turned them into ash because they couldn't buy him a beer. He wanted a new start. He wanted no more ghosts. I would give him exactly what he wanted. I would ensure that by the time the sun set today, Richard Reynolds would have no past, no future, and no name. I would strip him of everything until he was nothing but a number in the federal prison system. I reached over and slammed the laptop shut. The sound echoed in the car like a gunshot. "No more games," I said aloud. My voice was unrecognizable to my own ears. It was deep, guttural, and terrifyingly calm. I didn't want to just win a lawsuit anymore. I didn't want to just get my house back. Total annihilation. That was the only acceptable outcome. I wanted to scorch the earth beneath his feet so thoroughly that nothing would ever grow there again. I grabbed my phone. I dialed Brenda, the realtor. "Sarah," she answered on the first ring. "I am pulling up to the driveway now." "Brenda," I said, "change of plan. What you want me to cancel?" "No," I said, "I want you to go in there, but I want you to bring a witness. Is your assistant with you?" "Yes, Mike is driving." "Good. Have Mike record the signing. Tell Richard it is for company policy. Tell him it is a celebration video. Just make sure you get him clearly stating that he is the owner and he has the right to sell." "Okay." Brenda sounded nervous. "Sarah, you sound different. Are you okay?" "I am better than okay, Brenda. I am clarified." I hung up. I looked at the house down the street. I could see the smoke rising from the chimney, the smoke of David's letters. I started the car. I put it in drive. I wasn't waiting for the sheriff to call me back. I was going to meet him. and I was going to demand that he bring the SWAT team because I wasn't going to that house to serve papers. I was going to war. Richard thought he had burned the past. He didn't realize he had just lit the fuse of his own execution. I pulled away from the curb, driving slowly, deliberately toward the sheriff's station. Every mile marker I passed was a countdown. Tick, tock, Richard. The sky over Virginia was a bruised shade of charcoal, heavy with a storm that had been threatening to break all morning. By 8 o'clock, the heavens finally opened up, unleashing a torrential downpour that turned the world gray and cold. It was fitting weather for what I was about to do. Sunshine would have felt wrong. This wasn't a happy reunion. This was a tactical strike. I sat behind the wheel of my black Mercedes, the wipers slicing back and forth with a rhythmic, hypnotic beat. I wasn't alone. In the rearview mirror, I saw the sleek, intimidating silhouette of a Lincoln Town Car. Inside sat Mr. Sterling and his junior associate, two of the most aggressive estate litigators in D.C. They were men who didn't just know the law. They knew how to weaponize it. Behind them was the sheriff's cruiser, its light bar dark for now, but its presence unmistakable. We moved in a slow, deliberate convoy down Oakwood Drive. The neighbors were likely peering out from behind their curtains, wondering why a funeral procession was returning to the Reynolds house 3 days after the burial. In a way, they were right. We were here to bury a legacy of greed. I pulled into the driveway first. The house looked different to me now. It used to look like a sanctuary, a place of warmth where David and I had planned our future. Now, through the rain-slicked windshield, it looked like a crime scene. The lawn was littered with the debris of their occupation. A red plastic cup was stuck in the hedge. A tire track from Kevin's SUV had torn up the grass near the mailbox. It looked neglected, abused, and sad. I put the car in park but didn't turn off the engine immediately. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of leather and expensive perfume. This was the threshold. Once I stepped out of this car, there was no going back to being the grieving widow who just wanted peace. I was crossing over into the role of the prosecutor, the judge, and the executioner. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. My face was pale, but my eyes were clear. I had applied my makeup with the precision of war paint. My black suit was sharp-tailored and impenetrable. "Let's finish this," I whispered to myself. I opened the door and stepped out into the rain. I snapped my black umbrella open. Behind me, I heard the heavy thud of car doors closing. Mr. Sterling stepped out of the Lincoln, flanked by his associate. He was wearing a trench coat that cost more than Richard's annual pension. He nodded to me, a silent acknowledgement that the game was on. From the cruiser, Sheriff Miller emerged. He adjusted his hat, the rain dripping off the brim. He didn't look happy. He looked like a man who was about to do something unpleasant but necessary. He caught my eye and gave a grim nod. He had seen the evidence. He knew what was waiting inside that house. We walked up the driveway in a phalanx, me in the center, the law on my right, the enforcement on my left. The sound of our shoes on the wet pavement was drowned out by the drumming of the rain, but the energy we projected was loud enough to wake the dead. I reached the front door. The lock, the one Richard had so proudly installed just 48 hours ago, gleamed mockingly in the gray light. He thought that piece of metal gave him ownership. He thought a key made him a king. I didn't knock. I rang the doorbell. Once. Long and hard. I waited. Inside, I could hear the muffled sound of movement. It took a long time. They were likely still asleep, hungover from their night of burning my husband's memories and drinking my wine. Finally, the lock clicked. The door swung open. Richard stood there. He looked terrible. He was wearing a stained bathrobe that was loosely tied around his waist. His hair was a mess of gray tufts sticking up in every direction. His eyes were bloodshot and puffy, the telltale signs of cheap beer and a guilty conscience, though he would never admit to the guilt. He blinked against the daylight, squinting at us. He saw me first. A sneer started to form on his lips, the same arrogant, dismissive expression he had worn when he kicked me out. Back for more. "Sarah," he croaked, his voice rough with sleep. "I told you, girl, you are not welcome here. Did you come to beg for your clothes back, or did you just miss me?" He started to close the door, dismissing me like a solicitor. Then his eyes adjusted. He saw the man in the trench coat standing next to me holding a leather briefcase. He saw the sheriff standing behind him, hand resting casually near his belt. The door stopped moving. Richard's hand froze on the knob. The sneer faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion that quickly hardened back into defensiveness. "What is this?" Richard demanded, puffing out his chest in a pathetic attempt to look authoritative. "You brought the cops." "Because I wouldn't give you a refund on the moving costs." He laughed, a dry, nervous sound. "Sheriff Miller, good to see you. I assume you are here to escort this trespasser off my property. She has been harassing us with texts all night." Sheriff Miller didn't smile. He didn't step forward to shake Richard's hand. He just stood there, the rain dripping off his hat, looking at Richard with a mixture of pity and disgust. "We are not here to remove her." "Richard." The sheriff said, his voice flat and official. "We are here to talk." "Talk," Richard scoffed. "I have nothing to say to her. The law is clear. Blood family. That is actually what we are here to discuss." Mr. Sterling spoke up. His voice was smooth, polished, and dangerous. It sounded like the closing of a heavy vault door. Richard looked at Sterling, assessing the expensive suit, the confident posture. He looked unnerved. He pulled his bathrobe tighter, realizing for the first time how small he looked in the doorway of the house he claimed to rule. "Who are you?" Richard asked. "I am James Sterling, representing the estate of David Reynolds and the financial interests of Mrs. Sarah Reynolds. And we are not staying on the porch." Richard tried to block the way. "Now is not a good time. We are expecting company. The realtor is coming." "We know," I said. My voice cut through the air sharper than the rain. I looked him dead in the eye. I didn't blink. I didn't look down. I looked at the man who had burned my husband's flag, and I felt absolutely nothing but the cold calculation of the next move. "We are the company, Richard." I stepped forward. Richard instinctively stepped back. It was a primal reaction. He yielded the ground because deep down in the lizard part of his brain, he knew he was the prey. We walked past him into the foyer. The smell hit me immediately. Stale beer, cigarette smoke, the musk of unwashed bodies. It smelled like a frat house, not the home of a hero. I walked to the center of the hallway and turned to face him. The sheriff closed the door behind us, shutting out the rain, sealing us in. Richard looked from me to the lawyer to the sheriff. He was starting to sweat. The arrogance was still there, but it was cracking, revealing the panic underneath. "You are making a mistake, Sarah," he hissed. "You are embarrassing yourself." "No, Richard," I said, unbuttoning my coat to reveal the suit underneath. "I am just balancing the books." The living room was exactly as I had seen it on the camera feed, but the reality of the smell was visceral. It was a mixture of wood smoke from the fireplace, stale beer from the poker game, and the sharp, nervous sweat of people who knew they were cornered. The burnt remains of David's memory box were still in the hearth, a pile of black ash that Richard hadn't bothered to sweep up. I walked past it, my heels sinking into the carpet that Vanessa had stained with red wine. I felt a surge of nausea, but I pushed it down, locking it away in a steel box in my mind. This was not the time to mourn. This was the time to prosecute. Richard followed us into the room, his bare feet slapping against the hardwood floor. He was trying to regain his composure, trying to inflate his presence to fill the space, but against the silent, suited figures of Mr. Sterling and Sheriff Miller, he looked like a child playing dress-up in a grown man's house. "You have 5 minutes, Richard announced, crossing his arms over his bathrobe. "I have a realtor coming at 9. If you are not gone by then, I am filing charges for trespassing. And you, Miller, I thought you were David's friend. I thought you had respect for this family." Sheriff Miller stopped in the center of the room. He turned slowly to face Richard. He didn't look like a friend today. He looked like the iron hand of the state. He took off his wet hat and held it at his side, his eyes hard and unyielding. "I was David's friend, Richard," the sheriff said, his voice low and dangerous. "That is why I am here. Because if I wasn't wearing this badge, and if I didn't have sworn duties to uphold, I would handle this situation very differently. Be grateful I am here as a sheriff, not as a brother-in-arms." Richard faltered, the color draining from his face. He opened his mouth to argue, to bluster, to pull rank as the father, but the sheriff cut him off. "Sit down, Richard." It wasn't a suggestion, it was a command. Richard looked at the sofa, my sofa, where he had let his friends spill food the night before. He looked at me standing tall and immaculate in my black suit. He looked at the lawyer, who was already opening his briefcase on the coffee table with the precision of a surgeon preparing for an operation. Richard sat. He slumped into the corner of the couch, pulling his robe tight around his knees. At that moment, the sound of footsteps came from the stairs. Kevin and Vanessa appeared, drawn by the voices. They looked disheveled. Kevin was wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt. Vanessa was in a silk robe that I recognized immediately. It was mine. "What is going on?" Kevin asked, rubbing his eyes. "Who are these people?" Vanessa froze when she saw me. Her eyes darted to the sheriff, then to the lawyer. She instinctively pulled the robe tighter, as if trying to hide the fact that she was wearing stolen property. "Sit down," the sheriff repeated. "Both of you." They scrambled to the adjacent love seat, looking at Richard for cues. But Richard had no cues to give. He was staring at the coffee table where I was now arranging my files. I didn't sit immediately. I stood over them for a moment, letting my shadow fall across their faces. I wanted them to feel the shift in power. Yesterday they had stood over me while I packed my bags in the rain. Today I was the towering figure, and they were the ones looking up. I took the seat directly opposite them, on the high-backed armchair that David used to read in. I sat with a straight spine, my hands folded in my lap. I didn't speak. I didn't greet them. I simply looked at each of them in turn. I looked at Kevin, the tax cheat. I looked at Vanessa, the thief. I looked at Richard, the fraudster. The silence in the room stretched out tight and suffocating. The only sound was the rain drumming against the window pane and the scratching of Mr. Sterling's pen as he made a note on his legal pad. Richard finally cracked. "Well," he snapped, his voice trembling slightly. "Say something. What is this about? Is it the insurance money? Because I already told the adjuster that—" I moved. I didn't speak. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out the first file. It was a thick black folder. I slid it across the coffee table. It hit the wood with a heavy, authoritative thud. Then I pulled out the second file, a red folder. I slid it next to the first one. Thud. Then the third file. Blue. Thud. I arranged them perfectly parallel to the edge of the table facing Richard. I smoothed the labels with my hand. Richard looked down at the labels. Even upside down, the bold black letters were legible. The black folder was labeled Federal Tax Evasion and Wire Fraud. The red folder was labeled Aggravated Identity Theft and Forgery. The blue folder was labeled Trafficking in Stolen Property. Richard's eyes widened. He looked up at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "What are these?" he whispered. "These," I said softly, my voice calm and devoid of emotion, "are the receipts. You told me yesterday that this house belongs to the Blood family. You told me that I was just a guest. You wanted to talk about ownership. So let us talk about ownership." I reached forward and flipped open the black folder. The first page was the spreadsheet of Richard's bank transactions, highlighting the illegal gambling deposits and the structuring transfers. "I own this data, Richard," I said. "I know about Tony. I know about the $200,000. I know about the money laundering." Richard went pale. He looked at Kevin, then back at me. How did you—" I ignored him. I flipped open the red folder. I pointed to the forged deed of trust, the one with David's signature. "And I know about this," I continued. "I know you forged a dead man's signature to steal $150,000. I know you put a lien on my house while your son was fighting a war." Richard started to shake. Real physical tremors. "And Vanessa," I said, turning my gaze to her. She shrank back into the cushions. I flipped open the blue folder. The pawn shop receipt lay on top with her thumbprint clearly visible. "I know you sold my engagement ring for $4,000 this morning, and I know you are wearing my robe right now." I leaned back in the chair, crossing my legs. "The sheriff is not here to evict me, Richard. He is here to escort you. The only question remaining is whether he escorts you to the curb or to a federal holding cell." The room was silent again, but this time it was the silence of a tomb. The air had been sucked out of the room. Richard looked at the files, then at the sheriff, then at me. He realized finally that he wasn't playing a game of family politics. He was staring down the barrel of his own destruction, and I hadn't even started on the eviction notice yet. Mr. Sterling cleared his throat. The sound was polite, precise, and utterly terrifying in the sudden silence of the room. He didn't look at Richard with anger. He looked at him with the boredom of a man who had destroyed far more important people before breakfast. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a single crisp document bound in a blue cover. Mr. Reynolds Sterling began, his voice filling the room without him ever raising it. You have been operating under a significant misunderstanding regarding the legal status of this residence. You have repeatedly stated to my client and to the locksmith you illegally hired that this property reverts to the Blood family upon the death of your son. Richard sat up straighter, clutching the arm of the sofa. It is the law, he stammered, though his voice lacked its usual conviction. David bought this house. It is a marital asset. If he dies without a will, the state of Virginia says— Mr. Sterling held up a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. Actually, the state of Virginia says nothing of the sort, when the deceased never owned the property in the first place. Richard blinked. What are you talking about? Of course he owned it. I saw him sign the papers. I was at the closing. You were at a closing, Sterling corrected, but you clearly didn't read the deed. This house is not and has never been titled in the name of David Reynolds, nor is it titled in the name of Sarah Reynolds personally. Sterling opened the document and spun it around so Richard could see the bold text at the top. The owner of record for 42 Oakwood Drive is a limited liability company registered in the state of Delaware, an entity named Phoenix Rising, LLC. Richard squinted at the paper. So what? It is just a shell company. David probably set it up for tax reasons. It is still his. It is still marital property. You can't hide assets from the family just by changing the name on the mailbox. He looked at Kevin for support. Kevin nodded vigorously, happy to latch on to any lifeline. Yeah, Kevin chimed in. It is community property. Sarah is his wife. Anything she owns, he owns. And if he is dead, we are his next of kin. We are entitled to half. Richard pointed a shaking finger at me. You think you are clever, girl, using corporate loopholes. A judge will see right through this. It is joint assets. I watched enough court TV to know that marriage means 50-50. I watched them flail. It was pathetic. They were clinging to an understanding of the world that hadn't been relevant since the 1950s. They thought marriage was a merger of equals. They didn't realize that in my case, marriage was a partnership protected by an ironclad firewall. Mr. Sterling smiled. It was a thin, razor-sharp smile. I am glad you brought up the concept of marital assets, Mr. Reynolds, because that brings us to Exhibit D. He pulled another document from his stack. This one was thicker bound with a silver clip. Before Sarah and David exchanged vows, they executed a document that I personally drafted, a prenuptial agreement. Vanessa gasped. A prenup? But they were in love. Rich people are in love, Vanessa, I said, breaking my silence. They are just not stupid. Sterling slid the prenup across the table. Section 4, Paragraph 2. Sterling cited from memory. Any assets acquired by either party through the use of funds derived from pre-existing separate business entities shall remain the sole and separate property of that party. Phoenix Rising, LLC, is a wholly owned subsidiary of Sarah's forensic accounting firm. The funds used to purchase this home came entirely from her commercial dividends. David Reynolds was never an owner. In the eyes of the law, he was a tenant. A beloved tenant, certainly, but a tenant nonetheless. Richard picked up the document. His hands were shaking so hard the paper rattled. He scanned the pages looking for a loophole, looking for a mistake. This can't be legal, he sputtered. He was a soldier. He paid the mortgage? He paid rent, I corrected. We had a joint account for household expenses. He contributed to the utilities and the groceries. But the equity, the brick and mortar, the land you are sitting on, that is mine. It always has been. David didn't own a single square inch of this floor. Richard threw the paper down. He stood up, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. "I don't care about your fancy paperwork," he screamed, saliva flying from his mouth. "This is my son's house. I am his father. I have rights. You can't just erase his family because you have a better lawyer. Even if the house is yours, the contents are his. The car is his. The insurance is his. And as his father, I am challenging the estate." He was panting, his chest heaving. He looked wild-cornered and ready to bite. "You are going to sue me?" I asked, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than his screaming ever could. "Yes," Richard roared. "I will sue you for every penny. I will tie this up in probate for years. You won't see a dime until I am dead." I stood up slowly. I walked around the coffee table until I was standing directly in front of him. I was close enough to smell the fear coming off him in waves. "You won't be suing anyone, Richard, and you certainly won't be tying anything up in probate." "Why not?" he sneered. "You think you can stop me?" I don't think I said. I know. Because under the Slayer Statute of Virginia and under general probate law, a beneficiary forfeits their right to inherit if they have committed a crime against the estate. Richard froze. "What? What are you talking about? I didn't kill him?" "No," I said. "You didn't pull the trigger. But you killed his financial identity. You forged his signature. You stole his credit. You defrauded his accounts." I pointed to the red folder on the table, the one containing the forged deed of trust. "You are not an heir, Richard. You are a predator. And in the eyes of the court, a predator cannot inherit from the prey. You have no rights here, not to the house, not to the car, not to the insurance. You don't even have the right to breathe the air in this room." I leaned in closer, my voice hard as diamond. "You are done. The only thing you are inheriting today is a prison sentence." Richard stared at the red folder as if it were a radioactive isotope. The color had drained completely from his face, leaving him looking gray and old, a stark contrast to the blustering tyrant who had stood in this same room yesterday, demanding I leave. He reached out a trembling hand, perhaps to open the file, or perhaps to sweep it off the table in a fit of denial. "Don't touch it," I said, my voice sharp as a whip crack. "That is chain of custody evidence. It has already been scanned, logged, and sent to the district attorney." Richard snatched his hand back. "You are bluffing," he rasped, though his eyes darted nervously to the sheriff. "You can't prove I signed that. It is my word against a dead man's. I will tell the judge. David authorized it before he left. I will tell them he gave me power of attorney verbally. Who are they going to believe, a grieving father or a vindictive widow?" I shook my head slowly, almost pitying his stupidity. "They aren't going to believe either of us, Richard. They are going to believe the biometrics." I opened the red folder to the page I had printed from the lender. It was the high-resolution scan of the loan document. I pointed to the bottom right corner next to the forged signature. "Do you see that smudge?" I asked. "That is the thumbprint required by Shadow Creek Capital for all non-bank borrowers. I ran it through the database this morning. It is a perfect match to the prints you have on file from your DUI arrest in 1998. Richard stopped breathing. The air in the room seemed to freeze. "You signed your son's name," I continued, relentless. "But you left your own mark. That is aggravated identity theft. That is bank fraud. And because you used the U.S. mail to send the payments, that is mail fraud. Each count carries a mandatory minimum sentence. You aren't looking at a fine, Richard. You are looking at dying in federal prison." He slumped back into the cushions, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. The fight had left him. The reality of the steel bars was finally overriding his delusion of grandeur. But I wasn't done. I turned my head slowly to the left, fixing my gaze on Vanessa. She was trying to make herself small, pressing herself into the corner of the love seat, pulling the collar of my silk robe up to hide her face. She looked like a child caught stealing candy, except the candy was a diamond ring, and the punishment was a felony record. "And you, Vanessa," I said softly, "you thought you were just collateral damage. You thought because you didn't sign the loan you were safe." I didn't do anything," she stammered, tears welling up in her eyes. "I just came to support Kevin. I didn't know about the loan. I swear no," I said. "You didn't know about the loan, but you knew about the jewelry." I flipped open the blue folder. I pulled out the pawn shop receipt. I held it up so she could see her own signature at the bottom. "Frank Russo sends his regards," I said. Vanessa let out a choked sob. Her hand flew to her mouth. "You walked into Gold and Glory Pawn at 10:15 this morning," I recited, my voice devoid of mercy. "You sold one Chanel handbag serial number ending in 459. You sold one David Yurman bracelet. And you sold a custom platinum engagement ring engraved with the words, 'Per aspera ad astra.'" I leaned forward. "Do you know what that Latin phrase means, Vanessa?" She shook her head frantically, tears streaming down her face, now ruining her makeup. "It means through hardships to the stars," I said. "It means you have to earn your place in the world. It doesn't mean you steal it from the woman who actually worked for it." I dropped the receipt onto the table. It landed on top of the pile of evidence. "You signed a declaration of ownership," I said. "You claimed those items were yours. That is fraud. The value of the goods exceeds $5,000. That is grand larceny. And since you crossed state lines to go to that specific pawn shop in Maryland, you have technically committed a federal offense, trafficking in stolen goods." Kevin jumped up, trying to defend his wife, but his voice was weak and shaky. "Wait a minute. She found those things. They were in the house. It is finders keepers." "You left them here. Abandonment of property requires intent," Mr. Sterling interrupted smoothly, not even looking up from his notes. "Mrs. Reynolds was forcibly evicted under duress. She did not abandon her property. It was seized illegally. Therefore, taking it is theft. Selling it is trafficking." Kevin sat back down, defeated. He looked at his father, then at his wife. He realized there was no lifeboat. The ship was going down, and they were all chained to the deck. Sheriff Miller cleared his throat. The sound was heavy and final, like a gavel hitting a block. He stepped forward, the floorboards creaking under his authority. He reached to his belt and unclipped his radio. "Dispatch, this is Sheriff Miller at 42 Oakwood." "Go ahead, Sheriff." The radio crackled. "I am executing the warrants now," he said calmly. He looked at Richard. "Richard Reynolds, please stand up." Richard didn't move. He stared at the carpet, at the ash from the burned letters that he had refused to clean up. "Stand up!" Richard the sheriff barked, his voice filling the room. Richard slowly pulled himself up. He looked fragile. He looked small. The robe hung loosely on his frame. Sheriff Miller reached behind his back and pulled out a pair of handcuffs. The metal clinked a sharp, cold sound that made Vanessa scream. "Richard Reynolds, I have a warrant for your arrest for the charges of aggravated identity theft, forgery, and wire fraud." He spun Richard around and snapped the cuffs onto his wrists. Richard flinched, but didn't resist. He was in shock. "Vanessa Williams," the sheriff continued, turning to her. "Please stand up." "No," Vanessa wailed, clutching Kevin's arm. "Kevin, do something. Call a lawyer. I can't go to jail. I have a brunch tomorrow." Kevin pulled his arm away. He was looking at her like she was a stranger. He was saving himself. "Stand up, ma'am," the sheriff ordered. Vanessa stood up, sobbing hysterically. The sheriff cuffed her hands behind her back. "The silk robe, my robe bunched up around the metal. I have a warrant for your arrest for grand larceny and trafficking in stolen property." The sheriff looked at Kevin. "And Kevin Reynolds." Kevin looked up, eyes wide. "Me? I didn't sign anything. I didn't sell anything." "No," the sheriff said, pulling out a third pair of cuffs. "But you have 18 outstanding warrants for unpaid parking tickets, driving with a suspended license, and I just got a call from the IRS Criminal Division regarding a failure to appear. They asked me to hold you as a flight risk." The click of the third pair of handcuffs was the final period at the end of their sentence. I sat in the armchair watching them. 3 people who had tried to erase me, 3 people who had mocked me, 3 people who had burned my husband's flag. Now they were standing in a line, heads bowed, hands bound. I stood up and smoothed my skirt. I walked over to the table and closed the folders. One by one, black, red, blue. I picked them up and handed them to the sheriff. "Here is your paperwork, Sheriff," I said. "I believe everything is in order." "Thank you, Mrs. Reynolds," he said. "We will take it from here." He began to shepherd them toward the door out into the rain. "Wait," Richard said, stopping in the doorway. He turned to look at me one last time. His eyes were filled with hate, but also with a dawning, terrible realization. "You planned this," he spat. "You let us do it. You watched us." I walked up to him. I was close enough to see the broken veins in his eyes. "I didn't plan your greed, Richard," I whispered. "I just audited it." And then I closed the door in his face. The rain had turned the front lawn into a gray, weeping marsh mud, splattering against the tires of the police cruisers. I stood under the shelter of the porch overhang, my arms crossed over my chest, watching the sheriff and his deputy escort the prisoners out of my home. It was a scene that should have been tragic, a family being led away in handcuffs from a house of mourning. But as I watched them stumble into the downpour, I didn't feel tragedy. I felt the satisfying click of a ledger finally balancing out to zero. Richard was the first to be shoved toward the back seat of the sheriff's car. The shock of the handcuffs had worn off, replaced by a frantic, bellowing rage. He twisted his body, fighting against the sheriff's grip, slipping on the wet pavement. He wasn't looking at the police. He was looking back at me, his face twisted into a mask of self-righteous fury. "You are evil, Sarah!" he screamed, his voice cracking over the sound of the rain. "This is a violation of nature. I am his father. You don't turn family over to the police. Where is your morality? Where is your conscience?" I watched him struggle, finding his lectures on morality fascinatingly ironic. This was the man who had stolen from his son while he was deployed. This was the man who had burned a Purple Heart because it had no resale value. "Family takes care of family," Richard howled, as the sheriff forced his head down to clear the doorframe. "You will rot in hell for this. You are destroying a dynasty." The sheriff slammed the door shut, cutting off his tirade. Inside the car, I could see Richard still shouting, fogging up the glass with his impotent rage, banging his cuffed hands against the window. He still believed he was the victim. He would probably believe that until the day he died. Then came Vanessa. She wasn't fighting. She was dissolving. The arrogance she had displayed in my closet, the smugness she had worn while selling my ring, had completely evaporated. She was sobbing so hard, her shoulders shook violently. Her makeup ran in dark streaks down her face, ruining the silk of my robe that she was still wearing. When she saw me standing on the porch, she dug her heels into the mud, forcing the deputy to pause. "Sarah, wait!" she cried out, her voice high and desperate. "Sarah, please! Tell them to stop! This is a mistake!" She looked at me with wide, pleading eyes, trying to conjure a connection that had never existed. "I am sorry. Okay," she babbled. "I was just doing what Richard said. I was scared of him." "We are sisters, Sarah, remember. We are supposed to look out for each other. Don't let me go to jail." "I can't go to jail. Please just drop the charges. I will give everything back." I looked at her. I really looked at her. I searched for any flicker of the woman who had smirked at me at the funeral, the woman who had thrown my clothes into the dirt. I didn't see a sister-in-law. I didn't see a family member. I saw a stranger who had broken into my sanctuary. I took a single step forward, staying dry under the porch roof while the rain soaked her to the bone. "I don't have a sister, Vanessa," I said, my voice cutting through her sobs like a scalpel. "And I don't negotiate with criminals. Sarah, please," she wailed, reaching out a hand as if she could grab my empathy. "You are trespassing on private property," I said, turning my back to her. "If you have anything else to say, you can say it to my lawyer, or to the judge." I nodded to the deputy. He pulled her forward. She screamed my name one last time before she was shoved into the second cruiser next to Kevin, who sat staring blankly ahead, already resigned to his fate. The car doors slammed. The engines roared to life. The flashing blue lights reflected off the wet driveway, washing the house in a cold, cleansing rhythm. I watched them drive away, disappearing down the street where they had once arrived as conquerors. They were gone. The parasites had been excised. I turned back to the open front door of my house. It was quiet now. The smell of them was still there, faint and sour, but the presence of their malice had vanished. I walked inside and locked the door. This time I was the one holding the key. The door clicked shut, sealing me inside the silence. But the house didn't feel empty. It felt infected. The air still held the heavy, sour scent of their presence. I could smell Richard's cheap cigar smoke trapped in the curtains. I could smell the stale beer Kevin had spilled on the rug. I could smell the cloying floral perfume Vanessa had sprayed in my bedroom to mask her theft. It was a sensory invasion that made my skin crawl. I couldn't just live here. I couldn't just open a window. I needed to scrub the DNA of their betrayal from every surface. I pulled out my phone. I didn't dial a local maid service. I dialed a disaster restoration company, the kind used for crime scene cleanups and industrial accidents. I needed professionals who understood that some stains go deeper than the surface. I need a full environmental purge, I told the dispatcher. I want the carpets chemically treated. I want the air ducts vacuumed. I want every square inch of this house sanitized. And I need it done today. They arrived in 40 minutes. A van full of men in white Tyvek suits and respirators. They looked like they were preparing to handle nuclear waste, which felt entirely appropriate given the toxicity of the people who had just left. I stood in the foyer, directing them like a general on a battlefield. The kitchen first I ordered, the refrigerator, the counters, bleach everything. Then the guest room, strip the bed, burn the sheets, do not wash them, just destroy them. I watched as they moved through the house with military efficiency. The roar of industrial vacuums drowned out the memory of Richard's shouting. The sharp antiseptic smell of hospital-grade disinfectant began to replace the odor of greed. It was aggressive. It was harsh. It was exactly what I needed. But then I walked into the living room. One of the cleaners was spraying foam onto the beige linen sofa. The sofa where Kevin had put his muddy boots. The sofa where Vanessa had sat while lying to the police. The sofa where they had laughed about selling my home. "Stop," I said. The cleaner paused, looking up at me through his safety goggles. "Don't clean that," I said. "Ma'am, the wine stain might set if we don't treat it now," he said. "I don't want to treat it," I said, walking over to the piece of furniture. "I want it gone. Help me drag it to the backyard." He hesitated, but he saw the look in my eyes. He didn't argue. He signaled to his partner. Together we hauled the heavy piece of furniture out through the French doors and onto the wet patio stone. The rain had stopped, leaving the air crisp and cold. We pushed the sofa onto the gravel area near the fire pit. I went back into the garage and grabbed a can of lighter fluid. I walked back out to the sofa. It sat there stained and pathetic, a monument to their disrespect. I squeezed the bottle, dousing the cushions, the armrests, and the frame. The clear liquid soaked into the fabric, turning it dark. I struck a match. The flame flared up bright orange against the gray sky. I dropped it. Whoosh! The fire caught instantly. The heat hit my face, drying the rain on my skin. I watched as the flames licked up the back of the sofa, consuming the evidence of their occupation. The fabric curled and blackened. The foam inside hissed and popped. Black smoke rose into the air, carrying away the invisible weight of their entitlement. I stood there for a long time, watching it burn down to the wooden frame, then to ash. I didn't feel sad about the furniture. It was just a thing, and things can be replaced. Dignity, however, has to be reclaimed. When the fire finally died down, leaving nothing but a scorch mark on the gravel, I turned back to the house. The cleaning crew was finishing up. The windows were sparkling. The floors were gleaming. The air smelled of lemon and ozone. It was sterile. It was empty. It was mine. The sound of the Atlantic Ocean crashing against the shore is the only music I listen to these days. It is a rhythmic, cleansing sound that washes away the memory of rain and sirens. It has been exactly 12 months since I walked out of the house on Oakwood Drive for the last time. I listed the property 2 weeks after the arrests, selling it to a young couple who saw it as a starter home, completely unaware of the war that had been fought within its walls. I sold it fully furnished. I didn't want to take a single stick of furniture that Richard or Kevin had touched. I wanted a clean slate. The proceeds from the sale did not go into my personal investment portfolio. Instead, I used the entire sum to seed the David Reynolds Financial Shield Foundation. It is a non-profit organization dedicated to providing free forensic accounting and legal services to deployed service members. We monitor their credit, secure their assets, and protect them from predatory lenders and greedy relatives while they are overseas. Every time we catch a thief trying to exploit a soldier, I feel like I am giving David a high five from Earth. It is the most fulfilling work I have ever done. I am currently sitting on the wraparound deck of a white clapboard cottage in the Outer Banks. This was David's dream. He used to talk about retiring here, about fishing off the pier and drinking cold beer in the sun after a long deployment. He never made it to this porch, so I brought him here in spirit. The wind chimes he loved are singing in the breeze. I look down at the playpen set up in the shade next to my chair. A 6-month-old baby boy is sleeping soundly, clutching a soft knitted blanket. Little David. He has his father's strong chin and my eyes. He is safe, he is loved, and he is completely shielded from the toxicity of his bloodline. He will grow up knowing his father was a hero who gave everything for his country. He will never know the names of the people who tried to steal his future. To him, they simply do not exist. Here by the water, there are no ghosts. There is only the horizon, endless and bright. As for the dynasty Richard thought he was protecting, it has crumbled into dust. The federal courts do not care about bloodlines, only evidence. Richard pleaded guilty to avoid a life sentence, but the judge still gave him 15 years for the aggravated identity theft and fraud. He will likely take his last breath behind bars alone and unmourned. Vanessa is currently working double shifts as a waitress at a roadside diner, wearing a uniform that costs less than the socks she threw in the mud. Kevin didn't stick around to support her. True to his cowardly nature, he abandoned her the moment the handcuffs came off, fleeing the state to dodge his tax liens. He is living in his car, looking over his shoulder, waiting for the IRS to catch up. They wanted a life they didn't earn, and now they are paying a debt they can never afford. Justice sometimes moves slowly, but it always arrives exactly when it is meant to. Do you believe that karma eventually finds everyone? If you enjoyed watching this greedy family get served, hit that like button right now. What was your favorite part of their downfall? Let me know in the comments below. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another story where the underdog takes everything back.